A cold breeze blew through my bedroom window. I sat up in my bed, still half asleep. The tree out front had completely shed its leaves, the onset of winter. Seeing the cold creeping in put a smile on my face. Business was about to boom. I dragged myself downstairs to get on with my day, stopping by the kitchen on my way. A carton of milk and 3 boiled eggs. I loaded the peeled eggs onto my plate and went to town. After getting my meal over with, I went down to the basement where I stored my weapons. I had to run a status check, and if necessary, stock up on more supplies. You see, winter is usually when a lot of monster species go to bed for a few months in North America. Most reptilian and mammalian menaces are either inactive or burrowed in caves. Through the months of October to January, most commonly known as the American Bigfoot, they dwindle in numbers before resurging in spring. Studies have shown that these swamp-dwelling amphibious frog gators burrow in mud through most of the dry season. And while winter certainly reduces the diversity of catch for us hunters, it is by no means a slow period. Winter is when the big bad of North America comes out to play. Winter is the Wendigo season. This time of the year is busiest for us hunters, all thanks to this ancient, ice-cold apex predator of these snowing lands. The moment the October heat passes by, I get flooded with calls and job offers, and this year I got quite the call indeed. On the wall furthest from the stairs were 7 gun lockers. I took out a Remington from the second. Seemed alright. There were about 2 boxes of rounds on the shelf. In the first locker sat my crossbow. I had to get the string replaced. The other rifles were in good condition for the most part. I opened up the 6th locker. There it was, sitting on the top shelf. My shotgun. The shotgun. My family's magnum opus. I still had 20 rounds of the Hi-X tungsten slugs. Good enough for this season, I guess, considering it only takes 1 to finish the job. I remembered my injuries from the first time that I used this thing earlier this year. I shuddered at the thought. I wanted to avoid using this thing for this year at least. I headed to my truck. I was going to have to go down to Barron's, a local dealer who also supplies special equipment to hunters in my area. I was instructed to meet up with the old man to collect specially sanctioned supplies for my up-and-coming job. As I was heading towards the stairs, I stopped by the last locker. I opened it up. Inside was a black leather trench coat. A deer skull was printed on its back in white. The sight of it brought back a lot of memories from the time when I was training at the academy. I took the coat upstairs and threw it beside my suitcase. I was going to need it anyway. I put the keys in and gave it a twist. She started right up, purring gently at idle. I drove down the freeway, pondering over that phone call. The first Wendigo-related call for this season, and it's something quite unique. I am tasked to capture one alive, and yes, alive. I didn't believe it at first. It's not that live capture hasn't been done before. Successful capture and containment has been performed 3 times in the past. 2 were bagged straight from the wilderness, while 1 was quite literally made and raised in captivity. A private funded study permitted subjecting a living, breathing human to the Wendigo curse in order to transform the said subject and observe the stages of transformation. It's pretty messed up. Definitely some sort of violation. But it is a far cry from the worst of the atrocities committed in the name of science. Wendigos are without question one of the top 3 worst monsters in North America, if not the worst. They aren't natural beings. All of them were once humans who were influenced by the Wendigo curse. A curse is a spiritual influence from a metaphysical entity. In this case, the curse of the Wendigo is embodied within a spiritual entity that finds its roots in the heart of the native lands. Dr. Houses was the first to document the manifestation of the curse in a living specimen in 1962. This curse begins to take effect from psychological triggers, particularly when the victims are put in extreme conditions of starvation or greed. Should the subject indulge in exploitation against their own ethical conscience under these conditions of extreme stress, most usually acts of cannibalism and murder, they undergo several morphological and psychological changes. Induced psychosis causes paranoia and insatiable hunger to set in. Bodily changes begin after a week of the trigger. Complete body hair loss followed by the subsequent replacement by extremely thin sensory hairs. Loss of body fat and emaciation of the body. Increased bone density by 400%. Reactivation of growth plates causing the elongation of limbs. Strengthening of fast-twitch muscle fibers all around the body. Posture changes and elongation of metatarsals, replacing the human plantigrade foot with a digigrade foot. The skin darkens to resemble ash gray and black. Nails turn into black claws and the teeth are replaced with sharp canine daggers. Eyes the ash white of death, with dark black sclera. The ears elongate. The jaws protrude for a larger bite. The cheeks tear, revealing the rows of teeth and the cartilage-based nose. It disappears as the nasal bone elongates and raises up. The result is a humanoid creature that prowls the taiga and boreal forests of the north relentlessly, searching for flesh to consume. They don't bother killing, they'll eat you alive. They'll lure you, track you down, and tear you apart. And you'll be there to witness all of it firsthand. I drove down the desolate road towards my dealer's property. After a 25-minute drive, I pulled up at a store. The usual old man was seated at the register, lighted cigarette in hand. "Myers," he said, acknowledging my presence. I walked towards the register. "How you doing, old man?" I asked. He took a long puff of his cigarette. "They've got quite the goods for you, Myers." "Yeah, winter's here. I would like a nice and comfy coat," I replied with a smile. Baron rose from his seat. "Oh, you're gonna love this," he said in his rugged voice. He led me to the back of the store through a big metal door. Mr. Baron is a trusted arms and equipment dealer. He, along with many others across the world, helps supply us hunters with the tools for the job. Trust me when I say that times were a lot rougher in this trade before technological advancements found their way into the uncanny hunting business. Nowadays, you commonly see stuff like RS imaging, sonar, radar, nanosensors, and proximity alarms being used in the field. You find all sorts of wacky tech at the dealer shops. The Baron led me to the warehouse out back. I walked down an aisle with racks 10 feet high on either side. They were stocked with all sorts of goods wrapped up in plastic packaging. I noticed a drone towards the end of the aisle. I pushed aside the packaging and took out the instruction sheet. As I was fiddling with the paper, Baron waddled up to me, dragging a wooden crate. I stood in front of it as he opened it up. Inside the crate were 3 metallic devices. They were in the shape of hexagonal prisms, 25 centimeters wide. The vertices were smooth and not pointy. The top had a handle which was attached to a circular mechanism underneath. The device was around 20 centimeters in height and was bisected in the middle. Connecting rods extended perpendicularly from these 6 vertices, connecting the top and bottom. "What is this?" I asked. It may sound stupid, but the R&D decided to call it an anti-voicer." "Anti-voicer?" I asked. "It apparently counteracts the voices of the forest." I picked up the device by its handle. It was about 12 kilos. The trickiest thing about hunting wendigos is dealing with their most terrifying ability, the voices of the forest. Sounds like a generic name, but it's truly horrifying. You all probably know that wendigos can mimic voices. That is true, but it's only a fraction of what they're truly capable of. Wendigos can generate low-frequency sounds that cause hallucinations. They might cause you to hear the voice of a loved one. Maybe your backyard suddenly has one more bush than usual. Maybe you're trying to track your way back home from a hike on the trail, but the forest and landscape seem unrecognizable. If a Wendigo gets too close to you, it can directly gaze deep into your soul and make the hallucinations even more severe. You see where this is going. The Wendigo will use any trick it desires to lure you closer to its jaws. The hallucinations are very simple, obviously due to the fact that an insane ravenous beast can only have so much imagination and creativity in manifesting auditory and visual stimuli. It employs basic elements of the cold forest and alters your perspective of your environment, both auditory and visual. When you're out in the wild, there's no chance of noticing that you're being baited. I held the device in my hand. After reading the instructions, I twisted the handle anti-clockwise. This released the latch on the bottom. I grabbed the bottom and pulled it from the top. The rods extended a foot before locking. Between the vertices at the center was a glass cylinder with a small black pyramid amplifier. 2 black wires extended from the top and bottom towards the center. I set it down on the ground. I could feel the very faint tingle in my body. It uses signal interference to cancel out the wave frequencies emitted by those idiots. This is just a Phase 1 prototype though. Its range of protection is up to 150 meters tops. Effects drop off with distance. I put the device back into the crate. So, this mission was also a field test for the prototypes, I thought to myself. As I grabbed the crate, Baron beckoned me over. One last thing, Myers. Your little trip is being sponsored. By who? I asked. 30 hours later, I was on a helicopter ride through the Yukon Territory. Sitting beside me were Anawan and Emily. These two were one of the best hunters of Canada. Just last year alone, they've successfully managed to take down over 80 Wendigos. Being seated beside 2 masters of the art, I felt a bit nervous about my performance. Emily tossed me a rifle. I examined it, and on the right side of the barrel, in matte black finishing, was the word Dragonfire. This was a whole new line of rifles to be tested in this mission. The manufacturers, who will remain anonymous, partnered up for this mission so that they could get field data for their newly developed weapons. Apparently the rounds have a capsule of napalm around the tips. They burn red hot when fired. The technician who gave us the demo told us that the bullets literally melt through their targets. And as you know, there's only 2 ways to kill a Wendigo: burn it to death or destroy its heart. The helicopter hovered over the treetops as the 3 of us rappelled down to the ground. Supply crates were dropped. The 3 of us took inventory of our supplies. We were ready. I looked around us. The green conifers were topped with the white of snow. Patches of rocky terrain were scattered around the snowy carpet of the forest floor. The pristine mountain ranges far to the west captivated me. The Canadian wilderness is truly a sight to behold. The cold breeze swept over my heavy coat. I grabbed 2 of the 4 crates. For now, Anawan was taking the lead. He was an expert at tracking. My job was more killing-oriented. Sensors in Sector 76 picked up movement 2 hours ago. Camera footage revealed it to be a large male grizzly bear. Grizzly? I asked. Yeah, but there's a catch. Anawan turned to me. Its left forelimb was torn clean off. You could see the broken head of the humerus jutting out of the wound, not to mention the 4 deep gashes across its torso. Right on the money, Emily said. You said the bear was moving northeast in the footage, right? Yeah, that's correct. Which means our friend should be at the border of Sector 77 right about now. We should check the caverns on the northern hills of 77, Emily suggested. There's a good possibility that we might find some leads there. It's the only cave system in a 15-kilometer radius. If this Wendigo has been settling here for a few days, it's probably sought shelter there. And we traveled east for 4 hours. Our goal was to get to a specific clearing that Emily and Anawan knew about. We would have a clear view of the cave entrances if we set up there. We were about 1 kilometer away from the clearing when Emily raised her hand, signaling for us to stop. I instinctively lifted my rifle, ready to shoot at any possible threats. Anawan pointed to the ground. Tracks, 45 centimeters in length, 30 in width, 4-toed digigrade. This indicates that the Wendigo had been fully transformed. The footprint was massive. This specimen was definitely one of the larger ones. The tracks seemed to lead off into the trees. We decided not to follow them for now. We headed towards the massive clearing. It was less than 1 kilometer wide. Towards the south, the trail led to a small lake. Up north were rocky hills, and I took out my binoculars. Up in the hills were 3 small caves. I could see them just above the treetops. This was a good spot. One of the best ways to kill a Wendigo is to enter its territory, and then wait for it to come to you. And trust me, it'll come to you. It always does. It seeks only to hunt and consume. Its appetite will lead it to us. We set up one large tent and unloaded our supplies. I stood guard at the front of the tent. The clearing was completely empty, like a blanket of snow. Gentle winds blew through our campsite. It felt calm, a bit too calm. That wasn't a good sign. One of the noticeable symptoms of the influence of the voices of the forest was a feeling of tranquility. A stressed out victim is less likely to play into a Wendigo's trap. For ages, hunters across the north would bite their tongues or pinch themselves every few seconds to keep themselves in the moment. The technique usually works with the average Wendigo. However, some specimens are too adept at using the voices. This is what makes them so dangerous. Not a lot of hunters would subject themselves to the position the 3 of us were in right now. But here we were, and here we would have to make a stand. I quickly went back inside the tent. "It's too calm," I said. The 2 of them immediately understood. Each of us grabbed an anti-voicer. The plan was to create a safe perimeter by planting the devices in a triangular formation. Anawan and Emily began walking to either side of our campsite. I walked straight ahead. Since the range of the devices was 150 meters, that meant that I would have to walk at least 280 meters north to ensure the optimum overlap. I walked towards the tree line in front of our camp. I heard the hoot of an owl. I froze dead in my tracks and I looked around. There didn't seem to be anything out of the ordinary. I had to walk around 200 meters more to get to the planting spot, right next to an old, singular withered tree in the middle of the clearing. I slowly made my way towards the tree ahead. All the while, the hoots of the owls persisted. As I got closer to the spot, I noticed that the owls seemed to be on all sides of the clearing, just beyond the tree line. I was getting closer to the tree. 150 meters, 100 meters. I heard comms from Anawan and Emily.
AV-1 planted. AV-2 planted.
Emily's voice came through my earpiece.
Waiting on you, Maya.
The comms were cut out by static. I was getting interference. It could be because of the devices, I didn't know for sure. I would have to relay this information to the technicians after getting back. 50 meters from the tree. 25. The owls cheered me on and I kept looking around, trying to pinpoint the direction of them. 10 meters away from the tree. I stopped. I held the anti-voicer in my hands. Twisting the handle anti-clockwise, I heard the latch release. I pulled the top and bottom away from each other, revealing the amplifier mechanism. I could hear a low hum as the device powered up. A blue LED light began blinking on the top console. As I put the device on the ground, listening to these startup beeps, I remembered something. The first time we had entered the clearing, I clearly remembered thinking to myself, the clearing is completely empty, like a blanket of snow. The device was up and running, but I didn't dare move a muscle.
Myers,
Anawan's voice spoke to me through the earpiece.
don't move.
I slowly lifted my head in the direction of the withered tree. Staring back at me were the ash-white eyes of death. The creature was massive. It was definitely 10 feet tall. The Wendigo tilted its head. I could smell the pungent odor of rotten flesh. It and I both knew that I wasn't falling for its BS anymore. The Wendigo slowly opened its jaws. Its lips and cheeks were torn to reveal the full extent of its teeth. It let out a low growl. I turned tail and ran. I sprinted straight back to the campsite. I heard an ear-piercing screech from behind me, followed by rampant, maniacal thuds. It was giving chase. I needed to get close to the campsite so my colleagues could intercept the Wendigo. I heard the Wendigo gaining on me. I couldn't give up. I kept running with all my might. I heard somebody shout my name, and that was my cue. With one last stride, I dove to my right, trying to get out of the Wendigo's path. I heard loud gunshots just ahead. They were shooting at it. I got back to my feet. The Wendigo was only a few meters away, but now, it focused its attention on the other two. I ran back to the campsite and I could hear the firefight outside. They were trying to hold their ground. I quickly ran to the fourth crate and opened it. Bingo. I ran back outside and I joined the fight. Both Emily and Anawan were firing rounds into the beast. The wounds on the Wendigo were glowing red. It had burns on its torso and limbs. Despite its injuries, the Wendigo didn't show any signs of retreat. The bullets were just pissing it off even more. It charged at Anawan, who was caught reloading. I aimed at the beast and shot at its domed head. It didn't penetrate the skull, however. I stared at the monster once again, and it slowly turned to face me. Letting out a roar, it leaped at me with incredible speed. I dropped my rifle and unharnessed the 5-foot-long Dragonfire railgun on my back. I flipped the switch and took aim. A loud whine came out from the weapon. The barrel glowed a bright orange. The Wendigo lifted its arm to take a swing at me. I aimed at its shoulder and pulled the trigger. A loud blast rippled through the clearing. The bullet tore through the joint of the shoulder. The Wendigo's arm fell to the ground. It was blown clean off. Perfect. This was the only way that we would have to capture this thing. Blow off all its limbs and then airlift it to containment before it regenerates. Call for evac, Emily said. We'll be finished by the time they get here. We have to get this thing into a cell before it gets its claws back. The Wendigo stumbled back. It looked furious and it glared at me. It was going to charge again. The railgun needed a full minute to recharge. I couldn't immediately reuse it. I grabbed the rifle on the ground. Anawan unsheathed the sword. I looked at him as he pressed a button on the handle of the black blade. He dragged his finger along the blade. The edge began glowing red hot. Is that Dragonfire too? I asked him. No, he said. Just a hand-me-down from my brother. I took aim at the creature. It charged. I tried to shoot its eyes out, but it was moving too fast. It jumped at me. I tried to jump out of the way, but it swiped at me. I fell to the ground hard. The creature lost its balance and fell beside me. I rolled away as the creature was getting back on its feet. It roared in malice. The thing's jaws were 8 feet away when I saw Anawan running at full speed with a red-hot sword. With a single decisive swing, he sliced through the Wendigo's left leg. A clean cut. The beast fell once again. Get the net, Anawan called. Emily loaded the steel cable net into its launcher. Anawan and I both took a few steps back as she fired the net at the creature. The cable wound around the creature. It howled in rage, frantically looking around for its next prey. Unfortunately, all it saw were 3 hunters. Emily shot out its left eye. I ran towards the railgun. It should have been done charging by now. The sound of metal screeching made me look back. The Wendigo had managed to push its left arm through the net. Dark blood was trickling down onto the snow below. With one arm free, the Wendigo lashed at Anawan. He fell hard onto his back. The Wendigo wriggled towards him, swiping at him with its elongated arms. I grabbed the railgun and tried to flick the switch. Nothing happened. Dang it, it's not done charging, I thought to myself. Suddenly, I heard a scream from behind me. I looked back to see the Wendigo's claw hooked onto Anawan's leg. It pierced his skin, leaving a deep gash. The snow was colored with the Wendigo's and Anawan's blood. It started dragging him closer. I kept fiddling with the switch, hoping that it'll charge up at any second. I didn't want any human casualties. Amidst the blood-curdling screams of Anawan, I heard a gunshot. The Wendigo roared once again. Emily had shot at the eye socket of the Wendigo. It reeled back, releasing its grip. With his only working leg, Anawan rolled ahead and raised his arms above his head. He mustered up all of his remaining strength and screamed at the top of his lungs. The blade of his sword cut through the arm of the Wendigo. I flipped the switch again, and the railgun began humming. Emily and Anawan started moving away from the Wendigo as I aimed for its neck. I pulled the trigger. The mighty spear of God pierced the devil's neck. The forest was illuminated by the railgun's magnificent flare. The Wendigo's head fell to the ground with a loud thud. It was blown clean off. The entire cervical spine was destroyed. Its body twitched, trying to free itself from the net. There was a gaping cavity where the neck should have been. The head lay motionless on the ground, jaws shut tight. The Wendigo had fallen. I sat down, letting out a sigh of relief. It was over. We had finished the mission. Without its head, the Wendigo can't function. It'll be a few hours before it regenerates its limbs again, after which it'll look for its head and reattach it to the main body. I walked up to Anawan, who was lying on the ground. His wound was still bleeding. I helped Emily administer first aid. We wrapped up his leg in an attempt to stop the bleeding for now. Off in the distance, I could hear a helicopter approaching. I went inside the tent to retrieve a flare. The extraction team was here. Anawan should be able to make it in time. The body was put into a reinforced cage. The threat was neutralized for now. It will have reached containment long before it could pose a threat. I strolled down the corridor of the facility. Anawan got emergency treatment just in time. They managed to save his leg. The Wendigo was put into a cell in time. From what I was told, it managed to butt its elbow joints just before being locked up. I stopped by the glass. Inside was a square room 25 meters wide and long. The walls were all white. Upon the white tiles of the floor was an elk carcass. Sitting right on top of it was our cannibal friend. It had completely healed all of its wounds. I watched as it tore through the poor elk with its brand new claws. As it was munching on its spleen, it slowly turned towards the glass. I met its gaze once again. I could feel the malice. It wanted to tear me to shreds. It hated me, and I knew it. I held its gaze for a while longer. A shiver ran down my spine. I felt my vision warp as a cold breeze blew around me. I didn't dare move. I felt a hand on my shoulders. I snapped out of my trance as a young man spoke to me. "Sir, you've been staring for 3 minutes. Are you all right?" I looked at the guy. He had a security uniform on. "Yeah, I'm all right. I'll just head home. It's been a long day." I told him as I began walking towards the exit. I was flown back home after receiving my paycheck. I went to the fridge and I pulled out a beer. I think I'm gonna take a break for a week or two. What I saw in that room, no, what the Wendigo showed me is a sight that I'll never forget. A cold breeze blowing over a desolate and snowy landscape. Through the blizzard, a family of 5 piled up on the ground. The 2 toddler twins dyed the snow red. The older adult sister twisted and mangled beyond recognition, all of her fingers bitten off. The father's entrails spilled out from deep gashes on his torso. Amidst the pile of corpses, a pale young starving girl, holding the decapitated head of her own mother, completely covered in blood. The young girl slowly lifted her head, away from the mother's half-eaten cranium, staring directly into my eyes. The left eye was light brown, the right, the ash white of death. A crescent moon lay fixated in the night sky, as these stars slowly frolicked past it. Even in absolute silence, they seemed to dance to a symphony unknown to mankind. "Hey Dad," my 4-year-old self asked. The rest of the stars changed their places after some time, but that star over there hasn't moved at all. I glanced to my right. My old man just stared up at the night sky. "Oh, that one. It's called the Pole Star. You know, it always points towards the north. If you ever find yourself in a situation where you're lost at night and need to figure out directions, look up to the stars." I continued to stargaze for a while. It was one of the few occasions that we bonded over well into my adolescence. However, the tranquility of the moment was interrupted by a single beep. My dad bolted upright, glancing at his phone. He had a serious look on his face. Naturally, as any toddler would, I was frightened. "Dad?" I asked. "Is something wrong?" My father turned towards me and smiled. I was expecting words of reassurance. He spoke in a soft and gentle voice. Something broke through the perimeter fence and triggered the motion sensors. His smile persisted. "Perhaps you should get inside and lock the doors. Take Brownie with you." That night I felt uneasy. We often had coyotes trespassing before, and Dad pretty much handled it by himself every single night. This time, however, it somewhat felt different. I saw a face in my dad that I had never seen before. While my dad rushed off to confront our intruder, I scrambled inside to secure the house. Even from a distance, I could hear the hysterical wails of the pigs from the barn. I was a bit worried about the livestock, so I grabbed a pair of binoculars that I had, and I aimed it at the barn. It was a fairly spacious structure with a patch of trees surrounding it from 2 sides. From my window, I could see the right side of the barn and the patch of trees which surrounded it from the back and left sides. The lights were off, yet the darkness radiated in an unsettling vibe. I scanned the area to no avail. Brownie, my German shepherd, paced frantically behind me. His nails clicked on the wooden floor, which reminded me to let Dad know of an impending nail-clipping session. As these seconds passed, I grew increasingly annoyed by the constant clattering. I started to turn around in hopes of calming him down. However, Brownie bolted towards the window and started growling. He had an aggressive yet nervous look on his face. I knew Brownie was too big of a wimp to confront whatever was out there, so I once again armed myself with the binoculars, and I scanned the barn for anything. There was nothing around the barn, but as I moved my gaze towards the patch of trees behind it, I noticed something moving within the trees. As it circled around the barn from the left, I got a good look at the creature. It was like a dog, a big one at that. Imagine a pit bull on steroids, or something along the lines of that. It was huge and bulky. It stood almost 4 feet at the shoulder. It had a broad snout with a fairly bulky muzzle. Initially, I was almost convinced that it was a boxer, at least based on its face. but something about it seemed completely off. Even as I stared at the beast with my own eyes, it felt as if it had no presence of its own. It felt like a mere projection prowling around. In the course, black fur almost completely broke its outline. A few patches of bare gray skin spread across its torso. As it stalked to the side of the barn, the moon gave us just enough light to give out these minute details. The scariest part, however, was the pulsing black aura surrounding the beast. It had a fiery radiance to it. It seemed to emit the darkest of hues. I didn't dare move a muscle. I simply stared as the beast continued its way to the barn's entrance. It circled around the right wall and headed towards the door. It disappeared within the darkness, and the loud, distinct sound of shattering wood filled my ears. The thing broke through the barn doors. There were a few growls, and the pig's wails became even more desperate. And then everything seemed to die down. Not a single sound. Even the crickets seemed to have better things to do than chirping around. It was unsettling. 4-year-old me was overwhelmed by its presence. However, the pigs let out one last encore. In a single moment, everything spiraled down into chaos. Not just the pigs, but the chickens and even some of the sheep we kept started going absolutely berserk. The animals started letting out terrifying cries for help. The noises boomed across the field. I could hear some animals banging aggressively on the walls of the barn in a last-ditch attempt to escape the horror that had come for them. That dog didn't even let out a peep. It was like witnessing a ballad orchestrated by the god of death itself. I had no means of seeing what was going on within the barn, and frankly speaking, I didn't want to. I crouched down against my bedroom wall, not making a sound. All the while, Brownie lay right beside me. The screeches lasted no longer than 2 minutes. Dead silence prevailed afterwards. I looked up. The silence was like an alarm to me. I got up and peered out of the window, just in time to see that demonic dog carrying a pig's carcass with its mouth. It walked a few feet and rested the carcass down. The dog then went into high alert and started looking around, probably trying to see if anybody else was around. It didn't occur to me to duck down, and surely enough, the dog's gaze rested upon me. It had menacing red eyes. I gazed into its crimson ocular abyss. It stared back at me, and then it started growling. I froze up. The dog took a few steps towards me and let out a howl of pain. Just a moment later, I heard the familiar sound of a gunshot. The dog's hindquarters fell to the ground. Suddenly, another bullet struck its leg, followed by another gunshot. The dog let out an ear-piercing howl. It looked towards the fields that stretched out in front of the barn. I saw a figure walking towards the injured beast. As it drew closer, I could make out a few features. It was my dad. In his left hand was a giant halberd. The dog started growling again. My dad calmly walked towards the dog, axe in hand. The dog was furious. In a final outburst of carnage, the dog lunged at my father, who was a mere 3 meters away. A moment later, the beast's body was on the ground, its head severed, fallen a few feet to the right. I couldn't even keep up. I barely saw Dad raising the massive weapon, much less swinging it, and before I knew it, the demon dog was dead. I rushed outside towards my dad. "What was that?" I asked with a worried expression. My dad held a cold expression, his gaze akin to that of an emotionless killer. "A black shuck," he responded. "It's kind of a phantom dog." He walked towards the barn, and I followed closely. He stopped at the broken door. I wished that I'd had time to cover my eyes, because nothing could prepare me for the slaughter within. The entire barn was covered in blood. A few bits of flesh and bone and internal organs were scattered across the room. In the center of it lay a pig's head. It had a look of sheer terror on its face. "Hey, Hugo," Dad spoke up. Tears burst out of my eyes as I looked towards him. He put his hand on my head. "Remember this well, boy. Monsters do exist." This story takes place in 2014, back when my dad was still alive. A time where I was getting fairly skilled in my profession. I was seated down thinking about those old times when the light in the cabin changed from red to green. The chopper slowed down a bit as it descended towards the ground. How did I even get here? 24 hours ago, I was at home enjoying my weekend. I was just about to head over to a friend's house when I got an email regarding an emergency assignment that I needed to attend to. Anyways, fast forward an entire day's worth of travel and preparations, and I was in Romania, flying over to some random ghost town with two hunters, Pearson and Mike. The chopper hovered close to the ground. Pearson was the first to drop onto the ground. I started gathering my equipment. I had brought along quite a bundle. And grabbing my huge sack, I jumped off the chopper and landed on the grass. The three of us gathered around as the chopper retreated. "All right, let's review our tasks once again," Pearson said, taking the lead. He pulled out his tablet and displayed a map of the town on its screen. "Right now, we have a perimeter set up all around the town's borders. According to the surveillance team, neither of them have left the area. Both of them are somewhere in the town. Now, the town is 2 clicks south from our position. Both of you will circle around from the west side. I'll find a vantage point to monitor the cameras around the perimeter and give you both a sniper support." I looked at Pearson. Based on his speech, I could tell that he wasn't very enthusiastic about storming the town himself. And to be honest, I could understand why. He continued. "Now here's a very important detail. There's a graveyard on the east side of town. Do not let them anywhere near it." He then turned the device in our direction so that we could see the screen. Lastly, our targets. These two are the people behind the massacres occurring in this region. They've killed hundreds, so I guess you can imagine just how much blood they've drunk till now. I stared at the two faces on the screen. Even as photos, their unsettling gazes stared deep into my soul. "Vampires," I muttered under my breath. "This is going to be fun." After around 30 minutes of walking, me and Mike reached the outskirts of the locality while Pearson went off to find high ground. I crouched down behind a damaged section of the wall, probably the remains of some old house. To my right was a patch of small huts. To my left, an array of 2-story houses. After peeking around the wall, I could see a vast stretch of bricks and concrete. A small path led downwards into a trench, which directly connected the east and west ends of the town. And bridges were built over this path to connect the two halves. It was too dark to see far off into the area, so I pulled out my binoculars. The trench twisted and turned, making an asymmetrical division between the north and south sides of the town. On the other side of town, I saw what looked to be a small church. "You spotted the graveyard yet?" Mike whispered. "No, not yet. I can't get a visual," I said. The view from my position was pretty limited. I called in Pearson. "I need the cemetery's position."
The cemetery is on the northeast side of town near the edge. It's clear as of now. You see that main footpath connecting the town sides? It forks halfway in. Take the left path and you'll find yourself near the church. 150 meters behind it is the graveyard."
Pearson responded. "Roger that," I said. I turned to face Mike. "Right, now we're on the west side of town. Right across from us is the graveyard. We'll both circle around the edges, clearing houses on the way. No matter what, we gotta draw these two out." Mike nodded. Pearson's voice came through.
"We've got satellite imaging on the town and the cameras on the perimeter give us a complete visual. I'll call for any threats or signs of movement. If anyone enters the graveyard, I'll take them out. So both of you don't enter it."
Any other point of interest that we should check out? Mike asked.
Yes, there's a decent-sized mansion near the southeast edges. I highly suspect both of them are in there. Keep clearing ground until you made it to the graveyard, then circle back towards the mansion. If they try to scram either I or the mines at the perimeter we set up will get them. The rest is up to you,
Pearson stated. I looked at Mike. Needless to say, this was going to be one heck of a hunt. We went along with the plan. Michael circled around by the north section while I headed out towards the back alleys that ran parallel to the main pathway. There were buildings crammed together a few minutes in, and I was completely surrounded by darkness. I would have been easy picking if I didn't have my night vision goggles on. The buildings around me creaked ever so slightly as if they were mocking me. My finger pushed on my rifle trigger a bit harder. An unsettling presence filled the dark path. Within the dead silence, I could make out a few whispers. The voices grew in number. It felt like a choir of all the souls of this town that had been laid to waste. I stopped walking. The darkness seemed to threaten me against taking another step, all the while taunting me to move forward. I didn't dare move ahead. I just stayed in place waiting for something to happen, for something to leap out of the dark and tear me to shreds. That's why I almost jumped out of my skin when I heard a voice scream in my ear. I looked around in panic. However, nothing was there. I was completely alone. After I recovered from my initial shock, though, I realized the voice in my ear was still screaming. It was Pearson. It took me a second to comprehend what he said and to understand the danger that I was in. He said,
Get out from those buildings now, something's coming your way. Get onto the main path so that I can give you sniper support.
My mind was having trouble processing the situation, but my body didn't hesitate. I turned to my left towards an alleyway that led straight towards the trench. As I started to run, I could hear the sound of rustling deep within the darkness. Not stopping for a second, I turned my head towards the path that I previously was heading down. There, clad in black, was the outline of something moving in the dark. It was humanoid in shape and had bright crimson eyes. It bolted straight towards me. I didn't dare look back. I hauled it out of there, heading out towards the pathway. As I was running away, I swear that I felt a hand almost grab my shoulder. If I hesitated even for a second, I probably wouldn't have been writing this. I didn't stop until I reached the pathway. The moment that I emerged from the alley, I felt a bullet fly right past my shoulder. A demonic howl of pain followed. It felt enraged and resentful. I turned around to face my pursuer, however there was nothing. It all happened so fast that I needed a moment to comprehend it. I called in on Pearson. What the heck was that? I asked.
Our suspect. It was definitely a vampire.
Suddenly I heard the rustling again. I looked back into the dark alleyway, but I could make out the same dark figure in the distance rushing towards me at full speed. I heard Pearson's voice come in.
Stay on the track and head straight for the graveyard. I'll keep him off of you.
I started sprinting once again. I heard another gunshot from Pearson's sniper, but I couldn't care less. Right now I had to secure the graveyard. I dashed through the dusty path. Houses zoomed past me as I made my way towards the cemetery. The road forked ahead of me and I turned left. It was quite a chore carrying my rifle. As I went down the curves of the path, I could see the church come into view. I sprinted straight past it onto the grass and dirt. I looked ahead and there it was. The cemetery. The gate was wide open. Given the situation, I didn't even bother being discreet with my entrance. I looked around the area. There were around 80 graves. Given the number of bodies, it was important to secure this area, especially since we were dealing with vampires. After taking a few steps in, I saw a man staring at the center of the plot. Mike. His gaze was quite intense, almost grim. I turned to take a look at what he was facing, and I almost dropped my gun. There amidst a sea of graves was a man crouched down facing the ground. He seemed to be drawing something on the ground. Dang it, we're late, Mike muttered. I looked at the graves around me. Each and every one of them had some pentagram drawn on them with blood. I looked at the person a bit closely. The ground around him was colored in a shade of red. What the heck was Pearson up to? I thought he had a clear shot of this area, Mike asked me. He was keeping the other one occupied so that I could get here, I replied. The graveyard is a very dangerous place when fighting against vampires. Their unnatural affinity towards death allows them to use a very rare and dangerous type of dark magic, ghouls. The second vampire was raising ghouls, counting the number of graves, around 80 of them. A dark malicious aura spread through the air. Its very essence seeped into the soil beneath our feet. A gut-wrenching feeling overcame me as the soil around the graves had started to shift. A hand emerged from one of the graves in front of me. It's already begun, Mike said as he loaded his rifle. I switched my rifle's mag from silver bullets to normal rounds. This is going to be a very long night, I thought to myself. The ghouls randomly rose from their graves. They're basically mindless corpses controlled by their summoner. As such, they compensate for their weakness in their huge numbers. A lone ghoul isn't a threat, but a horde certainly is. Me and my colleagues started firing at the undead corpses. The vampire hadn't moved from its position. He still hadn't summoned all of the ghouls yet. In the meantime, we were able to keep the ghouls at bay. Initially, they never seemed like a threat. The problem is, there's no way to put down a ghoul once it's been summoned. They sustain themselves through their summoner's spirit or something like that. No matter how many times we shoot them down, they just keep getting back up. We were getting pushed back further and further. I was running out of bullets, and it seemed like Mike was too. I was desperately trying to think up something when I heard a soft thud behind me. A footstep. I spun around instinctively, only to be met face to face with a walking corpse. This ghoul had snuck up behind me. I wouldn't have been able to react fast enough, and I thought I was going to die. Before I could do anything though, something pierced through the ghoul's cranium. The ghoul fell down onto the ground. I looked at its head and something was lodged in it. An arrow. It had blue, fletching on a brown wooden shaft. The arrowhead was tapered aggressively and ornate with a circular symbol embossed in gold. I looked around trying to figure out where it came from.
Watch your six.
A voice came through my earpiece. Pearson, I cursed under my breath. I didn't see you anywhere close. Where the heck are you? Another arrow came soaring through the sky, hitting a stray ghoul on its head.
You see that giant hill up north?
He said. You do realize that's around 1 kilometer away, right? You gotta be kidding me. Mike retorted as he shot at a few scrambling ghouls. Stop flexing on us with your magecraft.
Wait till you see this.
Pearson smirked as another arrow landed at the center of an impending horde. The next thing I know, the ghouls got engulfed in a fiery explosion. I hate you magic folk, Mike shouted. With Pearson's support, we were able to clear out a lot of the ghouls. I glanced at the vampire still bent over the pentagram. Nothing's going to change unless we kill him. All of a sudden, the vampire got up. It had finished the summoning. He stopped to admire the chaos that he had created. Our gazes met as he turned to face me. I felt a chill run down my spine as his eyes seemingly stared deep into my soul. Without wasting a single moment, he turned tail and started running away. He's trying to run, I screamed into my mic.
I got him,
Pearson called. He shot a silver-tipped arrow straight at his heart. However, the arrow stopped a few inches away from his chest. A black mass, kind of like a shadow, floated in front of his body. The arrow fell to the ground. I aimed at the monster and emptied my clip at it. Nothing. A few metallic clicks confirmed that all my bullets fell to the ground, completely deflected. Pearson tried putting a few more arrows into him, but to no avail. None of us knew what to do. Mike had run out of ammo and the ghouls had started to get up again. The situation was not to our advantage. But then Mike called out to me. Even in the heat of the moment, I could hear him say, "Don't let this go in vain." He started running towards the black mass, and he knew what he was doing. I knew what he was doing. But despite it all, I just stood there watching, not being able to utter a single word. He charged head-on with great valor. As he got within 5 feet, however, he stopped. Blood dripped from the hole in his torso as the shadowy tendril pierced his chest. I heard a click. The pin of a grenade. The ground shook as a violent shockwave rippled through the air. A bright flash blinded my eyes and a thunderous blast echoed in my ears. The dust settled. I glanced at the remains of Mike's final stand. The vampire was flat on the ground, twitching his body all over. Both of his legs were mangled while his arms were blown clean off. I flipped his body on its back. His face matched those of the records. He was the second target, and his name was Jeff. Although his body was blown up at point blank, he could easily regenerate himself if given the time. I pulled out my silver stake. Jeff gave me a menacing stare, and I pointed the stake at his chest. "Do you realize just how many people you've killed in the past few days?" I asked, staring him down. Jeff smirked. "How many breeds have you eaten in your life?" he replied. I shoved the stake straight into his heart. He let out one last groan before going completely limp. I sat down as his body slowly decayed, leaving a huge lump of black ash in its wake. Mike, or rather what was left of him, lay right beside me.
What the heck happened to Mike?
Pearson's voice came through. "Killed in action," was all that I could say. A good minute of silence followed.
"The second guy's in the mansion,"
Pearson spoke. "How can you be so sure?" I asked him.
"I drove him into it,"
he replied.
"Why do you think I ran out of bullets? Also, on a side note, I don't have a lot of arrows left."
"Well, what are you waiting for? Get your butt down here," I told him.
"I'm pretty far away, it'll take a while."
"I don't care," I said. I looked at the pool of Mike's blood spilling from his dislodged torso.
"I'm moving in now. We're going to see this mission through to the end, no matter what. In any case, listen up, I have a plan."
Pearson called. "About time," I replied. I approached the mansion gates. The iron hinges creaked as I pushed it open. The inside of the mansion was pitch black. I switched my goggles to thermal vision mode. Interestingly, vampires are even colder than their surroundings. They have no body heat. Consequently, they don't appear in thermal scans. They can be very hard to detect if you don't know what you're looking for. However, if there's a simple trick that most hunters use, instead of looking for red heat patches, they look for the coldest patches of purple or black to locate vampires. I looked around. There were no immediate threats in my vicinity. I started walking down the hallways. This mansion only had a single story with an attic above it. I decided to clear this level before going up. As I walked down the last hallway, I looked up at the ceiling, a patch of dark purple. I took out an explosive and attached it to the ceiling. The device beeped. I could see the patch move up a bit. I took around 15 steps before pulling out my detonator and pressing the button. Pieces of wood flew all over the place as the ceiling which connected to the first floor had collapsed. I heard a giant thud as a black figure fell down on the hardwood floor. I had used up all my rifle rounds, so I pulled out my Desert Eagle. 3 gunshots resonated in the hallways as I shot at the figure. I looked up to see if I had done any damage. To my surprise, a black shadowy mass hovered before the entity. Oh yeah, both of them are siblings. Of course they have the same type of magic shadow thingies, I thought to myself. I looked at the man. Furious would be an understatement. His eyes screamed murder. I booked it down the hallway and back towards the entrance. There was a staircase that led to the upper floor. I ducked into a random room and hid behind some furniture. This guy's name was Jimmy. He was the older brother of Jeff. Jimmy's footsteps continued down the hallway. He turned right onto another hallway which led to the dining hall. I waited another minute to play it safe before booking it back to the entrance. After locating the staircase, I silently began to climb it. I could hear Jimmy cursing and screaming at me for killing his brother downstairs. While he was occupied, I began setting up explosives all over the place. This was the last phase of Pearson's plan. I scanned around in my thermal goggles. This time, though, I was looking for a patch of red. Suddenly, I heard footsteps running up the stairs. I got into position waiting for Jimmy to fall for the trap. The first explosion occurred moments after he got on the upper level. I could hear his screeches intensify as he got more and more upset. I hid in what appeared to be his study. As the seconds passed, Jimmy's footsteps drew nearer. I peeked into the hallway. Even with all the darkness, I saw the outline of a tall humanoid figure. 2 blood-red eyes staring right at me. I instantly closed the door and retreated into the room. Not even a second later, I heard the door smash as Jimmy busted it open with a single kick. I aimed my gun at him and fired. I must have got 7 rounds in before that shadow stopped the rest. Jimmy was beyond consolation at this point. He grabbed me by the collar and threw me across the room. Before I could even process what was going on, I felt his hand grab my leg and throw me into a table. My back crashed against the plywood. The table fell sideways and I rested my head on a big broken piece of it. Using my battered up arms, I sat upright, looking at the vampire. Tears burst out from the psychotic killer's eyes. I watched as the droplets fell on the floor below and evaporated instantly. He did lose his brother after all. Jimmy wiped away his tears, returning his malevolent gaze back to his face. The shadowy mass stretched out to fill the room. They twirled and formed into tendrils as they slithered across the floor straight towards me. As I sat there, I heard a slight tap from behind the section of wood that I was leaning against. The ends of the tendrils sharpened into spears. Jimmy pointed them my way. "Only one of us will die tonight." Jimmy's voice boomed. "No kidding, Sherlock," I replied. I tilted my head towards the right. I heard the shattering of wood behind me as an arrow flew over my left shoulder. It moved so fast that Jimmy had no time to react. Even the shadow thing got torn through by the sheer force of the arrow. The silver-tipped projectile penetrated deep into the vampire's heart. A flash of bright white light illuminated the room. I heard the vampire's screams coupled with a gust of wind. The shadows were purged by the light. 2 hands desperately tried to crawl away from the engulfing light before being vaporized completely. Pearson walked around the broken furniture behind me as a heap of ash settled down on the floor. "I told you to distract him. Now get your butt handed to you," he said, extending his arm to me. I looked at the pile of ash and smoke, taking Pearson's hand. "You're an idiot, you know that."
Hello, the name's Ulysses, and I hunt monsters for the government. And I don't mean people. Vampires, zombies, demons, werewolves, hell, even a Wendigo. You name it, I've encountered it. Anyway, a little background on me. I was born in the bayous of Louisiana. I hunted gators for most of my life. And then the government comes and they say, "Ulysses, we want you to work for us hunting monsters." Can't say I blame them. I'm the best damn gator hunter in Louisiana. And I guess they figured I'd be pretty good at that too. I won't say how much I'm paid, but it's a hell of a lot more than any gator will bag me. Now, without further delay, I'll begin my survival guide to monsters. Let's begin with the basics, shall we? Vampires. I want you to take any stereotypical vampire and ditch everything that you know. While it's true the bastards hate sunlight, they aren't killed by it, and they don't give a damn about crosses or coffins. A real vampire is usually between 6 to 7 feet tall. They have teeth like a beaver almost, big and sharp. They are nocturnal, and when they aren't active during the day, they roam caves and underground areas like sewers. And they aren't like Dracula. They aren't, nor were they ever human. They're pale and look sort of like Gollum from Lord of the Rings. They're primal bloodsuckers, and trust me, a vampire feeding is never as clean as a bite to the neck. They hate sunlight, not because it hurts them, but because they lurk in caves and other dark places their whole lives. Speaking of which, they usually live anywhere from 20 to 40 years. They usually prey on animals, but they will attack humans in their territory. They live in dens like wolves. A good sign of a vampire den is nearby is that there will be no life in the cave. No insects, bats, or plants. Nothing. The only way to kill them is destroying the head. Moving on. Zombies. Now admittedly, these fellows are pretty close to what you think. Shambling corpses hungry for flesh. But they aren't I've been bitten a few times, so I would know. Not much to say, and I'm really. Avoid the teeth. Oh, and one more thing. The whole headshot thing is total bullshit. The only way to put him down for good is dismemberment or fire. And being bitten doesn't mean that you'll turn. Zombies are what happens when some idiot kids play with a Ouija board in a graveyard. Spirits lodge themselves in these corpses. Anyways, that's my guess. Moving on. Werewolves. Werewolves are just as mean as they are in the movies. However, they're bigger than in the movies. In all reality, they're about 12 feet tall and not friendly. Full moons are a myth, kind of. They turn during 3 scenarios: a full moon, a lunar eclipse, and the blood moon. But the transformation lasts for about a week, not a single night. And there's no talking to the person inside. That's a good way to get killed. Lycanthropy is not transmitted through bites. In fact, it's genetic. It's rarely passed down from generation, and they're pretty rare indeed. Also, kids with lycanthropy are like 6 feet tall puppies. Just an FYI. A werewolf can be stopped by 2 methods. The simplest is a bullet to the head. No need for silver. Method 2 is the cure. Stopping the beast from feeding for the entirety of their transformation will cure them of their status as a werewolf. Also, women can be carriers of the gene, but they cannot become werewolves themselves. Again, do not try that shit about, I know you're in there somewhere. It won't work. Demons. Okay, so everything you know is pretty accurate for these guys. They are otherworldly entities, and evil as they get. Some are true monsters. Others are a Saturday morning cartoon villain kind of evil. I have performed exorcisms, and if need be, I've had to burn a few people at the stake to save their souls. Not much to say here, so I'll move on. Sasquatch. The big one. Old Bigfoot is like a cross between a grizzly and a gorilla. 800 pounds of hair and bad attitude. I've only ever killed one. I've encountered them a few dozen times. They have hands like a fist of razor blades. Do not approach a Sasquatch, and for God's sake don't shoot at it. You'll just piss it off. They stick to themselves most times and live in the Northwest. Chupacabra. You remember how I described the vampires? This is their canine cousin. They're not very friendly and sometimes can be found living in the same dens as vampires. They can be tamed, but I wouldn't recommend trying it. The average chupacabra is about the size of a German shepherd. They have no hair or pigment, and they can bite as hard as any gator I've encountered. A shotgun can put them down though. If you encounter a pack of them, stick your head between your legs and kiss your ass goodbye. The Devil. I met Old Scratch a few years back. He's actually not a bad guy. I mean, he is the Prince of Lies and Darkness and Evil and all that shit. But he doesn't make deals for souls or anything. He really just kind of floats around existence, tempting people to sin. Cheating on spouses, murder, and so on. He doesn't care for it, mind you. It's just the influence his presence has. He typically takes the form of a middle-aged handsome man in a black suit with a red undershirt, black tie and a vest. He might also take the form of a woman in a blood-red dress. The easiest way to tell the devil is no matter what form he takes, he has a scar on his left hand, a snake tattoo on his forearm, and burn scars on his back. He doesn't even try tempting me anymore. I think he sees me like a therapist. When he's off the clock, so to speak, he's just kind of depressed. The demons do all the possession and stuff. He just kind of wants to be rid of it all. Anyway, that's all I've got time for right now. These are just some of the basics. And so, you know what to do if you encounter one of these guys. Welcome back to my little survival guide. This time, I'll be covering some of the lesser known creatures and monsters that I've dealt with. Urban legends will also be addressed. So here we go with a continuation of my guide to facing down life's little shit shows. Skinwalkers. The shape-shifting assholes love to inhabit the western parts of the states. They usually take on the form of a wolf or a jackal with a human face. They can mimic any voice, and I think they read minds too. One once imitated my own mom to mess with me. The bullet that I put in his head didn't do more than stun him, but they hate wrought iron. I know that because I impaled him with one and he didn't get back up. I'm saying he, due to the fact that it had a man's face. Anyway, they seem to be vulnerable to wrought iron. Moving on. Wendigos. Skinwalkers and Wendigo are often confused with each other from a perspective of culture, but they're distinctly different. Wendigos are actually similar to real vampires in appearance. Pale, gangly big teeth. But their head is misshapen and resembles a deer or a cow skull with antlers. They have a mane of black hair down their backs, and fingers with claws like a switchblade. They're loners and they eat flesh. They prey on campers in the northeastern United States. Unlike vampires, bullets won't put these guys down. No, you need to destroy their hearts and burn the body. And they're also fast as heck. So yeah, good luck if you encounter one of these fellas. The Jersey Devil. Okay, so this is a thing I couldn't kill, but I did manage to catch, and it's currently held by the government in a private facility. Head of a horse, feet of a goat, bat's wings and a long forked tail. This little bugger has been terrorizing the Pine Barrens in New Jersey for a few centuries now. Or it had been. Took me 2 weeks to track it down, but I finally trapped it. Caught him using some bait of a freshly killed chicken in a snare. Shot off its wings and I tranked it. Ugly son of a gun is currently holed up somewhere in Nevada. If he does get out, I'll track him again. And I might not let him go this time. Kappas. For those who don't know, Kappas are sort of like turtles. They're famously a part of Japanese folklore, but they've shown up over here too. They look like turtles but have some kind of growth on their heads that holds water. If it ever dries, they die. Mostly due to their gills being located there. They're mostly friendly, but they can be twisted little dudes too. They've drowned more than a few people, even tried to do that to me. Luckily, they aren't that strong on land. If you see them, watch yourself and stay out of the water and you should be fine. Trolls. Trolls vary in appearance and can be anywhere from 2 to 5 feet tall. They're in tribes, a lot like primitive people. They're ugly little fellas, covered in warts and have jagged, crooked teeth. They like to stay away from humans, however this isn't always the case. If approached with honest intention, they'll leave you be. However, they can sense it when you lie and they'll attack and kill those who try to trick them. They'll then eat the body of the victim and use their bones to make spears, and items like vases, bowls, and so on. The only way to kill a troll is destroying their head completely. Ogres. Shrek, they are not. These big fellows are about 12 feet tall, all the way to 18 feet tall. And they do eat people. In fact, I reckon we're their favorite thing to eat for supper. But I'm getting off topic. Ogres live in swamps and bayous. They make their homes out of large rotted trees. An ogre in the area is usually signified by the smell of rotting meat and poop. They're big, scaly, and have teeth the size of a steak knife. They're usually green, blue, or purple, and scaled, but this varies by the area. Do not approach an ogre den. They'll kill any trespassers on sight. Banshees. The loud ladies are some of the nastiest and most evil creatures. They can kill you if you're in earshot of their scream. Well, kind of. If you hear their scream, they know it. And when you're sleeping, they creep in your house like a mist, and they'll suck the life from your resting body. It'll look like a heart attack. Banshees hate mirrors. Don't know why, but they do. And they only come if you hear the scream. If you don't for whatever reason, but we're still in earshot, then it won't realize that you were in earshot. And they also love kidnapping children. Banshees can be killed, but only through live burial or cutting out their hearts. Don't try to fight them. If you heard their scream, it's too late. The Men in Black. The Men in Black aren't humans. There's something else. I'm not quite sure what. I do know that their suits aren't suits. That's their skin. And their sunglasses cover hollow eye sockets, with little beady red eyes in the center of their sockets. I think they're from another planet, honestly. They don't like being called out on it and turn pretty hostile when confronted. I've killed one, but the rest have ways of cheating death. Bullets are pretty effective at stopping them, but decapitation seems to work the best. The government don't like them and have a kill-on-sight order placed on them. Now, I would like to change pace a little bit. I figured you would like to hear about one of my encounters, so I'll tell you about my first run-in with a vampire. I had heard about a bunch of animal attacks where the victims were drained of blood. All the attacks were happening in a national park, so I did some investigating. I pinpointed the location of each attack and made a map. Found that all of them were near an old mine, so I grabbed my gear and I got to work. I lined the roof of the cave with explosives and I went down, armed with a flashlight, a road flare and my trusty pistol, into the old cave. It wasn't long until I saw one of those ugly guns. Not what I was expecting, honestly. It looked like a skinny, frail man with teeth. It turned to me and hissed. I was spotted, naturally, and the rest started running towards the noise. I pulled out a flare and I held it towards the monsters. They all scuttled away from the flare. I ran out of the shaft and I blew a shot. Unfortunately, one of them got out, and instead of turning to dust like I had expected, he jumped on me. He started biting at my neck, but I stopped him by shoving the flashlight between my neck and his jaw. I kicked it away and it jumped at me again. But before it could land, I blew its brains out. Grabbed a knife from the back of my truck and I took the thing's head off. Figured it would make a nice trophy. Looping back to more creatures. Goatman. This ugly gun and his kin can be found in Maryland. And yes, there is more than one. And they're smarter than most monsters that I've dealt with. And they're capable of using axes. I have a pretty nasty scar from my run-in with the Goatman of Beltsville. I took his head after chopping it off. And while I didn't see any more, I've heard of more sightings since I killed the thing, so I can only assume there's A, a copycat, or B, more goat people. Either way, they're stronger than any man, but a simple decapitation seems to do the trick. Oh, and don't kick them in the groin. They do not like that. In fact, let me go off course for a second. I figured that you all enjoyed my little story about my vampire encounter, and so you'd like to hear more of my work. So from now on, I'll be including my experiences with each entry in this here guide. Sounds good? Okay. Here's my story about the time that I hunted the Goatman of Maryland. I was still new to this whole killing monsters thing, and to be honest, I expected this Goatman to be something like a Scooby-Doo villain. I mean, a half man, half goat. It's stupid. But when I got to Beltsville, I asked the locals about the Goatman. Most of them just passed it off as a ghost story, but some swore that it was true. It was said to hunt in the woods near Fletchertown Road. I went out to the woods and, thanks to me working for the government, closed it down. And then I set up traps all along the road, set up a stand in a nearby tree. I must have been up there for a good few hours, because I was woke up by the sound of a bear trap snapping shut and then a roar, like a pissed off gorilla. I grabbed my gun and I went to the scene. Sure enough, there he was. The Goatman. He looked an awful lot like Bigfoot, about 7 feet tall and covered in hair. It had the head of a goat but with long sharp teeth. With no effort it seemed, he pulled himself free. He turned to me and he snarled. He raised his axe and swung it. I ducked just in time as it sunk into a tree with a loud thwack. I unloaded a clip into him, but I reckon that just pissed him off because he swatted me like a fly. He grabbed his axe from the tree and came at me again. I rolled out of the way as the head of the weapon landed near mine. Using my instincts, I kicked him right in the jewels. He showed pain, but he looked pissed. He stumbled back a bit, looking like a ram ready to charge. And he did just that, and I shot him in the back of the head. I heard the loud woodcut axe drop to the ground, and I dove for it. Grabbing it, it was heavier than any axe I'd ever used. It wouldn't stop me though. I swung it and I heard a thud. Two actually, as the Goatman's head fell into my lap. I breathed a sigh of relief. Guess it wasn't a hoax after all. I threw the ugly thing's head in the back of my truck and radioed in for a pickup of the body. It's currently stuffed on my wall, in case any of y'all are wondering. Anyway, on to the next ugly. Sirens. Now admittedly, I've only ever encountered a few of these ladies. They aren't just sea creatures either. They're more like a stereotypical vampire. They lure men in before showing what they really are, and dragging them to the deep. Underneath the beautiful exterior is one ugly son of a gun. Basically, she has all the teeth of an anglerfish and the face of one too. However, just like the Goatman, a simple decapitation will kill them. My first time seeing one of them was down in Louisiana. I was in New Orleans investigating a bunch of dead bodies washing up on the beach. They all had chunks bitten out of them. First, I chopped it up to sharks or maybe even a gator, but the bite marks were too spread out for that either. Too clean too. I did some digging and I found out all the victims loved them some woman of the night, if you know what I mean. I started investigating every brothel and whorehouse in the Big Easy. I pinned the siren down to a specific one, owned by a Madame de Sade. Only problem is this wasn't just a brothel, and there wasn't one siren. It was a siren den. They would lure these poor fellas in. Their brothel was near the water, so it was a perfect honey trap. Yes, I'm looking for some fun if you know what I mean, I said to a pretty young receptionist. She winked and said, "Sure thing, honey." She led me to the back and I was hit with a wave of perfume. I was greeted by a brunette with green eyes. "Maddie here will take care of you." It was as I was being pulled into the room that the smell became clear. It wasn't perfume. It was sea salt. She smiled at me and pulled me in. "You're so cute, I could just eat you up," she whispered into my ear. She then tried to surprise me and bite at my neck with those huge teeth. I pushed her away, gun to the chin. "Nice try, sweetheart," and I pulled the trigger. Just then, the smell of dead people, dead fish, and seawater all at once filled the room. I damn near puked. The others kicked in the door. "Damn, you ladies were a whole lot prettier a few minutes ago," I said, the venom in my voice filling the air. "Dinner time, girls." Who I could only guess was the reception screeched out to that ugly mug of hers. "Eat this, you ugly things," I said, pulling a sawed-off shotgun strapped to my thigh out of its holster. I blew the first who came at me across the room with a shot. I punched the next and used the butt of the gun to knock out the third. The last two looked at each other. One turned to me saying with a voice like broken glass and sandpaper, "You're not supposed to fight back. Why aren't your voices working?" I pulled out an earplug. "Gotta love 'em," I said, smirking as I reloaded the gun. I let loose 2 more shots, splattering their heads on the wall behind them. Looking at the rest, who were all still breathing, with the exception of the first one that I had killed, I sighed, pulling out my hunting knife. Man, I really hate to have to dull this blade. I got to work, knocking them back out if they woke up. Before you ask, I ran out of bullets. Thought there'd only be 1 siren, not 6. I'll be the smartass here, and I'd appreciate it if you let me do my thing. I would include more monsters, but I felt like I should tell you folks about this. The devil came to me yesterday. It went something like this. "Hello, Ulysses," a smooth voice said as I drank at the bar. I turned and saw a beautiful woman in a blood-red dress. Her left hand had a burn scar, and a snake tattoo wrapped itself up her left forearm. I noticed the thing seemed to move as she sat beside me. "What you want, Nicole?" I said, using the name the devil used as a female, playing on his old nickname. At least that's my guess. She ordered a Bloody Mary and gave me a smirk. I would say it could send a chill down the spine of the devil himself, but, well, it is the devil. "Oh, come now, I just want to talk." I snorted in response. "Don't you have a baby to eat or something?" I took a sip of my whiskey. "Don't be cruel. We both know that's not my style, Ulysses. Besides, Dad would never allow it," she said, pointing to the ceiling. I noticed her face was ever shifting and her eyes were as black as the night. "What do you want?" I asked again, getting impatient. "Fine. I'm here to tell you to stop what you're doing." I turned to her and said, "Why the hell would I do that?" "Oh, you mortals, you're so naive, it's cute. Do you really think the people you work for will let you just leave when you're done? I know a thing or two about betrayal." She grabbed my hand and placed it on her back. I felt the scars on her back. I would have pulled away, but she was inhumanly strong. "I like you, Ulysses. You're the only person who gets me. I'm just trying to help you is all. Do you really think you're working for the government? No, your bosses are a lot older than that." She stirred her drink with her finger, causing it to slightly ignite. "Thanks, Beelzebub, but I don't need your help." She sighed and said, "Fine. standing up and walking out to the door. I smelled fire as she left. I paid my tab and I stood up. How did you know I was thinking about leaving this job behind? And what if she was right? I mean, the government was going through all this trouble to cover things up. Why would they ever let me walk away? This morning when I woke up, there was a number burned into my arm. It didn't hurt, but it was there. A phone number. I knew this was the work of the devil. Why were they trying to help me? What were they up to? It doesn't matter. Sorry, I didn't have as much to tell you about monsters. I've had a lot to think about. There's a zombie case the next town over, so I'll probably let you guys know how that goes. Oh, and one more thing. I found a letter in my glove box. Don't listen to Satan. We're, and more specifically, I am who you listen to, and you do well not to deal with the devil. L. No idea what that means, but I'll keep you updated on this and have more tips to keep you alive. And until then, Ulysses out. Hey everybody, I'm back. As I mentioned about that zombie case that I was going to investigate, well, it wasn't a zombie, it was a skinwalker. Rather, a pack of them. Shape-shifting assholes took the form of typical zombies, vampires, so on, to hunt prey. I can't really say why. Their usual form usually serves them fine. I'm not going to go into detail about how I tracked him down or figured out what was really going on, because that's not important right now. Long story short, I found their nest. Usual fare as far as skinnies go. Bones and the smell of dead meat. Skinwalker nests are usually made from fur, flesh, tendons, bones, etc. All woven together in cave systems. But again, I wasn't too fazed by any of this at this point. It was what I found that threw me off. There were dozens of corpses. Skinwalker corpses. Another hunter maybe. And then I noticed the slashes. What the? I kneeled down. No normal animal can take down a pack of skinwalkers. These things were apex predators. So what happened to them? I felt sick to my stomach. Skinwalkers weren't killed easily. I know that from experience. So that meant something else was in these woods. The night was already starting to fall and I was miles from any road or city. Hell, my truck was a few hours hike from me. I pulled out some jerky, ate a piece, and I got to work setting up a makeshift camp. A fire wouldn't be necessary for warmth, but I didn't want to risk whatever killed them coming for me. Hopefully it would stay away from the light. I wouldn't be getting any sleep that night, or rather I couldn't, too risky. I stoked the fire a bit and heard a voice behind me. Someone's on edge. I turned around and there stood, and once again, the devil. What the hell? You have anything to do with that? I gestured to the cave. He, taking the form of an old park ranger, shook his head. Nope, not me. He pulled out a cigarette and lit it with his index finger on the scarred hand. Figured you could use some company. He took a drag of the smoke and exhaled. Never did much care for these. The taste reminds me of home though. He muttered, the fire reflecting off the dark sunglasses that he wore. Why are you here, Nick? He smiled. Can't I check in on an old friend? We both know you and I aren't friends. I replied, listening to the fire pop. Touché. If I'm honest, I've got nothing else going on. It is a Tuesday. Not much temptation to do during Tuesdays. He sat down and I looked up. And so you're gonna bother me. Now where's that famous Southern hospitality? Didn't they teach you manners in the bayou? Yeah, but they also taught us not to mess with the devil. Well, that's fair. I just wanted to earn you about the crier. The what? I looked up and he was gone. The hell? Before I could react, I was thrown down by what felt like razors. I looked up and I saw a really tall thing. It wasn't like any monster I'd ever seen. It was dark, but I'll try to give you the best description that I can. It was probably about 8 feet tall. It stood up like a man and it had no eyes. Just a large gaping mouth with more teeth than a chainsaw. It had 4 arms, with 2, I think, coming out of its back. Each arm had razor-sharp claws with 4 fingers on each. I could feel the blood gushing from the wound that it gave me. "What the hell are you?" I said, ignoring the blood on my mouth from the impact. It let out a roar. I think it was a roar, but it sounded like a baby crying. I was unarmed, so I had no choice but to run. It was pitch black and all I had was a flashlight. I could hear it running after me. That damn crying sound behind me. I ducked behind a tree to catch my breath. What was that thing? I knew it was what had killed the skinwalkers, but what was it? The wound on my chest had soaked my shirt in blood and I could barely move, but I had to keep going. That thing was gonna find me and I didn't much fancy being tomorrow's leftovers. I would have kept moving, but my wounds and generally how tired I was would not allow for it. I spent the rest of the night sitting in darkness. Having lost my flashlight during my run from the thing, I could only guess was the crier. I heard the sound of it crying the whole night, but luckily, I didn't run into it anymore. Well, not before daybreak. I made it to my truck around 9 a.m. Several hours later, and just as I did, I heard the crying again. I grabbed my shotgun from the back of my truck and readied myself. Everything hurt, everything, but I wouldn't go down without a fight. It had crawled down from a tree like a spider in front of me. It swiped at me and I moved. I kinda regret that, looking at the huge slashes in my truck's door. But back to the story. I shot it in the mouth, but all that did was stun it. I ran to my truck and I cranked it up. I floored the pedal as the ugly thing gave chase. Eventually, it gave up and it fled into the woods, but not before messing up my truck real good. I'm in the hospital now. Luckily, they let me keep my phone. I told my superiors about my encounter and they said they didn't have any record of anything like that. So what the hell was in those woods? And why is it just now showing up? Did Satan have something to do with it? I couldn't be sure. If he did, why warn me about it? I'm leaving this hospital ASAP. I gave a cover story of a bear attack. My bosses are sending in a team to hunt that thing. There's no chance in hell that I'll be joining them. I'm no coward, but I've always said there's a fine line between bravery and stupidity. Anyways, that's all for now. Ulysses out. Hey everyone. An update on my life and the situation that I found myself in. The team that entered those woods in hunt of the crier, they didn't come back out. At least not all of them. Satan is showing up in my dreams now. They keep hinting at something bigger at work. I'm not sure what old Scratch is getting at. I'm in a hotel in bumblefuck nowhere. It reminds me of home, honestly. I haven't heard from the bosses in 3 days. I have a hunch about something in the area, but since I don't have any new updates for you folks, I figured I would share a story. So after thinking about it, I figured I would tell you the story of my first encounter with the Men in Black and the West Virginian Mothman. I've heard some stuff about the Mothman in the old ordnance works near Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Figured it was worth looking into. And so I set out one night to the site. As I got closer to it in my beat-up truck, a black Cadillac with tinted windows began following me, a few hundred feet behind me. I ignored it mostly, but when I stopped, at a point I judged suitable to hike the rest of the way. So did it. 2 men in black suits stepped out of the car. They had fedoras and pitch black sunglasses. They were way taller than me, about 6'6" each. Their skin was pale, almost see-through. Their lips were completely void of color. "Excuse me, sir. This is a restricted area," one said in an emotionless voice. The other nodded, grabbing my arm. I shook it loose and said, "I work for the government," spitting the wad of tobacco in my jaw. The man who grabbed me's hand was cold and a little slimy. "This is a restricted area," he repeated, stepping towards me. He got a little too close for comfort and grabbed me roughly. I responded with a punch right to his jaw. It hurt me more than him. Felt like punching a freaking wall. I knocked off his glasses though and hat. His head was devoid of any hair, and his eyes were hollowed sockets with little red beady eyes. They had a faint glow in the night, like lightning bugs. He said in unison with the other man, who stepped closer as well, "You are trespassing on government property. Leave now." He shoved me into my truck, leaving a small dent in his wake. I took my revolver from my side and I put it in his face. "I don't know what the hell you are, but you have about 5 seconds to back off before I put a bullet between those beady eyes of yours." And that's when the thing smiled, an inhumanly wide one. It got closer and I followed up on my threat and put a bullet right between them, but it just sat up like freaking Michael Myers. The other grabbed the gun and bent the barrel like a cartoon. It pushed me down with enough force that I felt my ribs crack. I quickly got in my truck and unlocked the door. They began rattling the handle and I knew they would get in eventually. And that's when I remembered my machete. Ever since I got lost in the bayou a few years back, I kept a machete in a pocket on the roof of my truck. I grabbed the blade and opened the door with enough force to knock them both down. One of them stood up and I quickly cut that thing's head off. The other cocked its head and it spoke. "This isn't over, Ulysses. Good evening." He turned and went back to his car, stopping only to retrieve his sunglasses. Breathing a sigh of relief, I got back on my original task. The dudes in the dark had almost made me forget why I was out there in the first place. On a bad leg from the run-in with the men, I hiked through the woods to what the locals called the TNT area, and placing some snares with the aid of a flashlight. I looked around in the trees. If the Mothman was real, I figured he would lurk there. As I looked around, I noticed a pair of bright red orbs in a tree. Shining my flashlights in the direction, they quickly vanished, as I heard the rustling of leaves like something moving through them. I heard something get snagged in my snare. I ran to the trap but found whatever was trapped had been cut free. Felt an overwhelming wave of nausea and saw the orbs again. I shined my light up and before I collapsed, I saw the Mothman. It was upside like a bat. It had a head like, well, a moth, and it had bat-like wings about 8 feet across. It looked 6, maybe 7 feet tall. I was really weak as the nausea had worsened. I got to my feet and I drew my knife. The Mothman responded by flying off. Next thing I knew, I was being grabbed and pulled into the air. It had feet like a cat, sorta. It had claws like a bird, but they were not talons. It was similar to, as I said, a cat. I was 20 feet in the air at this point, and against my better judgment and all honesty, I managed to stab its leg. It dropped me, screeching in pain. So trees broke my fall, but it didn't stop me getting a broken arm and a few cracked ribs. I blacked out on impact as well. I was woken the next morning by a paramedic. A hiker had found me and called for help. I never found the Mothman again, no matter how hard I looked. The men in black now are a lot less civil towards me, and I still have scars from where the Mothman had grabbed me. I'm not quite sure what to do about him. I'm writing this a few hours after the last paragraph. Speak of the devil. As I was writing this, there was a knock on my door. I saw the familiar black sunglasses and suits. "Hello, Mr. Ulysses. We work for the Federal Bureau of..." "Cut the shit. I know what you are. Now why are you here?" The leader of the duo of the men in black removed his sunglasses revealing those beady red eyes. You're a clever one. I pulled a cigarette out and I gestured as to offer him one. No thank. It's thanks. Yes, of course. He smiled politely. Normally you guys are trying to kill me. Can we wrap this up? I said impatient as I lit the cigarette. His smile wavered and he continued. We're here to tell you to forget what you saw in those woods. The crier? Indeed. Forget you saw it. I avoided eye contact with the pale bastard as I exhaled smoke. Then why should I do that? You wouldn't want it to find your mother now, would you? This made me pause. Is that a threat? It's not anything, Ulysses. Do not investigate it. That's our jurisdiction, not yours. I slammed the door in his face. Why were they trying to shut me up about the crier? I had no intentions to tell anybody, but that's not the point. It's confusing to say the least. Anyway, that's all I got for now. Ulysses out. First off, screw nuclear radiation. This is Ulysses, and I have a doozy of a story to tell. I went on a hunt for a Wendigo in the Nevada desert. Boy, I wish it was just a Wendigo. I've been making my way back to civilization for about 3 days, and now that I'm in a place that's safe, I'm typing this up. It all began after the last post. If you remember, I hadn't had much to share in the way of new stories. Well, I do now. There had been a brutal animal attack along a stretch of road in the Nevada desert that I can't legally name. From descriptions and eyewitness reports, I narrowed it down to the Wendigo. It fit their MO and their usual hunting grounds. I called in a favor and I had a part of the road closed off. For maintenance was the excuse we gave others. I even had some undercover agents posed as road workers. They knew what they were dealing with, or at least, they did as far as the Wendigos go. Those skinny son of a guns made their first attack at dusk. A guy, his name was Tim I think, was smoking a cigarette by himself and got his throat ripped out. Barely heard his screams because he was drowning in his own blood. When I arrived, the Wendigo was already feasting on his innards. Before I attacked it though, I was thrown off. This was no normal Wendigo. It was hideously deformed, well more than usual. It had 3 sets of antlers instead of the normal 2. It had teeth forming on its neck. Its hair was patchy, revealing tumorous skin beneath it. Not to mention, it had a third eye on its cheek. It turned and it hissed at me, leaping off its lunge and stalking towards me. I noticed that it walked with a limp, as one of its legs was actually shorter than the other. Drawing my gun, I put 3 bullets in its chest, right in the heart. It fell dead, and before I burned the body, I got a closer look. Its pale skin was horribly diseased. The patchy hair down its back had revealed tumors, sure, but the rest of it wasn't much better. I shined my flashlight on it, and another hunter, a Russian fella named Vladimir, smelling of booze and cheap cologne, walked up behind me. "Wendigo?" he asked. "Yep." "So you ever seen one like this?" I stood and I shined the light. "Yes, but only in one location. Pripyat." And I looked at him. "Apologies. You Americans probably know it's better as Chernobyl. It wasn't Wendigo, but it was like this." We burned the body and then we waited. There could have been more Wendigo in the area, and the smell of their brethren burning's carcass would likely draw them in. Sure enough, within an hour or so, I smelled rotting meat. A Wendigo pounced at me out of the darkness. It was much bigger than any Wendigo I had encountered, about 7 or 8 feet tall. Its teeth were horribly rotten, with several poking out of its gum line. I shoved the skinny thing off of me and got a look at the full beast. It had 7 fingers on one hand and 5 on the other. Its skin wasn't pale but an oily black, and its normal skull-shaped head was warped, looking half like a deer skull and half like a human, with misshapen antlers on its neck. Its hair was almost completely fallen out, revealing bubbling tumors beneath. I realized then that these poor bastards weren't normal Wendigo. They must have been mutated by the nuclear test of the 50s in Nevada. Whatever the case, it didn't look happy with me. I fired off 2 rounds into its heart, but that did little more than to stun it. It ran at me again. I quickly drew my knife as it tackled me to the ground. It bit a chunk out of my shoulder, but before it could do more, I plunged my knife into its heart. I pushed its now limp body off of me and covered it in gasoline. As it got ready to light the match, I saw another watching out of my eye. It was about the size of a child. I had taken to calling young Wendigos Wenleys. They weren't nearly as vicious as their parents, but they would be when they got bigger. Just like the rest, its skin had tumors. It feebly walked towards me, sniffling at the fallen Wendigo before me. It looked at me with the eyes of an intelligent creature, but it was still wrong. It looked like it had a nasty case of scoliosis, and its spine was bent all out of shape. It had a thumb growing out of its forehead, and far too many fingers on its hands. Sighing, I reloaded the pistol, and I put a bullet in its chest. As the bodies burned, it dawned on me that these guys were probably in a lot of pain, and they were doing what any animal in pain did: lash out. The Wendling had probably been impaired as far as Wendigos go. And no, I'm not using that in an insulting way. There's no way its brain was fully developed. Radiation had clearly mutated these poor things. Insert some shit about man being the real monsters here. I called to confirm the Wendigo sightings, and was told to stay put with the rest of the crew until daybreak. I saw Vlad getting shit-faced, and I decided to join him. After a few hours of drinking, we suddenly heard a scream. I ran over and saw a pack of mutated vampires having descended on the camp. Unlike the ones I had encountered previously, these guys were completely blind. Their eyes were milky white. Some had dislodged jaws like snakes, and others had eyes growing out of their torso, milky white as well. Their skin were varying shades of black, gray, and blue. Their teeth were more like barbs than regular fangs, but they were vampires regardless. The feral bloodsuckers circled in on me, and I honestly almost shit myself. Like I saw my life flashing before my eyes. Vlad ran through the pack, splitting them like a Red Sea with an improvised torch using a bandana, a stick, and vodka. The creatures, sensing the heat of the flames, hissed and backed up. Ugly things. I heard him curse to himself in Russian. Did I mention I picked up some Russian from my travels? Needed something to do on the long drives. Ulysses, stay close to the flames. Even when blind, these frickers hate it. He skewed them back as we made our way to the truck. Every time we got one too close, he scared it away with his torch. We got in the truck and locked the doors, radioed in for some backup. Too many for just us to take on. We kept the lights on all night. Neither of us slept. The battery died before sunrise, but I think they forgot about us. They never left the truck though. They banged on it, crawled on it. When the sun came up, they scattered. We took the opportunity to hightail it out of there. We had walked down the empty stretch of road for 3 days. And when we got back and radioed in, we found that a call for backup had never come through. We kept the fires burning hot during the night. The mutant vampires were still out there, and there was no telling how big their colony was. Right now, I'm in some shitty hotel in Reno. No idea what had happened to Vlad. All I do know is that they sent more hunters to find the vampire's den. The Wendigos, well, we aren't really sure if they're still out there. One thing I didn't mention was I heard the wailing of the crier one night. Vlad didn't even so much as budge, snoring heavily, but the wailing of that thing sounded in the distance. And I knew that it was hunting me, but nothing I could do now. Anyways, that's all I got time for now. This has been Ulysses. Hi there, Ulysses here, and this will be the final volume of my guide. I've taught you all how to deal with things from the Men in Black to nuclear mutants to Wendigos to vampires. But today is our final lesson. I'll teach you how to deal with the most dangerous of them all. This monster knows no mercy for others of its kind or its prey. Dozens have fallen to them. This monster, of course, is the one we call man. You see, while all of these things kill man, they do just what comes natural to them. We're the ones hunting them to near extinction. So today, we learn how to best man. But first, a story. After the nuclear vampire incident, it would make a great band name. I was put on leave, as was Vladimir. The bosses didn't like the idea of radiated mutated killing machines in the Nevada desert, so they sent in a death squad to clean up the mess. And that's when it dawned on me. See, these things were not pleasant, sure, but we made them that way. They were just defending themselves. We made them mutants. Did I ever tell you that I actually had a partner? Dude was a vet of this business, went by the name of Helsing. Went missing not too long ago. Investigated some cursed channel or something. Not important. I'm rambling, aren't I? Back to the story. After the job in the desert, I started having dreams. Vivid ones. A voice from a pit speaking to me, and disfigured men, looking like they were fused together. One of them, who wasn't fused to anyone else, had a really messed up back. The rest seemed to be gathered around him. "Find me," he spoke, and then kicked me into the pit. I didn't die though. Instead, I found myself face to face with something. It stood like a man, but its face was a mass of writhing vines and thorns. It took a branch like a finger, and grabbing my arm, carved coordinates into it. It spoke like 1,000 voices at once. "Find us." It was then that I woke up, my knife in my hand. I felt a stinging in my arm and saw the numbers. I won't give them away, but something told me that I should go. "Not a good idea, Chief," a familiar tone said, as I got in the truck to drive to the coordinates, using that Google thing. A teenage boy with long black hair, a horribly scarred left hand, with a snake tattoo on the same arm, and fiery red eyes said from the driver's seat. "Let me guess, one of yours," I said, looking at the devil beside me. "No, actually. I don't know what the hell it is, to be honest, but trust me, you don't want to go to those coordinates. You won't come back." I raised an eyebrow and I said, "Oh, screw off. You're literally the Prince of Lies." He sighed, and with a puff of smoke, he vanished. When I arrived at the coordinates, I found a hatch. Nothing fancy, just a hatch. It was padlocked shut, but a few hits from a sledgehammer fixed that. Climbing down the hole, which had a ladder inside, I noticed old blood covering it, not to mention body parts. A faint moaning from below. I heard the hatch swing shut. I climbed back up, but I couldn't open it. The thing couldn't be from the inside. Shining my flashlight around as I hit the bottom of the ladder, the first thing I noticed was the smell of death. Rotting, bloody flesh, like something had been dead for a while. The halls around me stretched on for miles, it seemed. The faint hum of dying fluorescent lights filled the air. I wandered down a series of hallways for a bit, with no real destination. I stopped when I saw a room full of medical equipment. "Experiment Chamber Number 1, a sign next to it said. I walked in and I shined my light around the dimly lit room. Papers and blood were scattered about. A blood-splattered clipboard on a table caught my eye. Project Lovecraft. I questioned reading it. Some kind of government experiment. Maybe. I threw it down and I heard something behind me. A starving man in a lab coat came out nearby a cabinet, swinging a fire axe. Whoa, easy there, Doc. I yelled, jumping as he swung his axe into the table beside me. Who are you? How did you get down here? Before I could respond, he cut me off. We need to leave this place now, before they find us. They? The 89A. He began to shove me along, but I easily stopped that, seeing as it looked like he hadn't ate in days. What are you talking about? Okay, just trust me. You don't want to find out. And just then, a hand scuttled in. He froze. And yes, I said a hand. Don't move. That one can't see us. He whispered, but I ignored it. I grabbed the axe and I split the hand between the fingers. I didn't need to know what it was to know that that thing was a natural. It kept moving though. The gash quickly healed and it grew an eyeball in the wound. Shit, the man in the lab coat said. I heard an inhuman scream from somewhere nearby. That was the last time I remembered. I woke up being dragged by two things. They looked like at one time they were human, but now they were all wrong. They were writhing masses of limbs, eyes, and teeth. They threw me in a room with others, people who weren't dead but very sick. Rashes were spreading, and I quickly looked around for my phone. I had to keep you guys updated on this kind of stuff. If nothing else, I could help figure out how to kill these things. Maybe another hunter could stop them. After I asked around, I pieced together what had happened down here. Most of them had been brought here by something telling them to come. But the ones who were here before, all hell broke loose. They told me a lot. This was a government bunker. Those things were man-made. They had been running some kind of experiment to make super soldiers. One got out and well, that's how they got here. They turned others through bites, like zombies, but also merged with each other. They were bulletproof, fast as hell, and had regenerative abilities. The hand I saw was a scout for one of them. They had been hunting anyone who came down here. What can we do then? I finally asked. Wait to be eaten or turned, an infected scientist mumbled. Why haven't they bitten me yet? I asked him, and he looked up, looking surprised. They haven't? I can help, a voice said from the corner. From the burned tan and snake tattoo, I knew who it was, but didn't acknowledge his true identity. His name tag read, L. Cypher. Well, I said, I can blow this place to home and back. What does that even mean? One of the infected said, and I replied, don't ask, but no, we need to get these people out of here. Can't be done. Broken Man won't let us, another mumbled. Broken Man? A scientist laughed. The escaped subject, Patient Zero. He controls the rest. Found the notes of our head researcher before he fully turned. I sighed and made a decision. Counting my bullets, 12 in total, I cocked my gun and I sighed. I have an idea. And with that, I walked around the room and executed all the infected. They were too weak to do anything but watch, honestly. I had 2 bullets left. A man-made monster. I turned to Cypher, whose body, despite having a bullet in the frame, was still fully conscious. Being the devil would do that. I told you not to come here. Shut up and tell me where this broken man is. And after receiving instructions from him, I heard the door unlock as he snapped his fingers. You might want to leave quick. These guys won't stay dead. I nodded. I made my way down the maze of labs, hallways, and blood-soaked bunk areas. I avoided the fleshy things, and noticed less wall and more flesh as I approached the den of the broken man. And then I heard it, the crying of a baby. On cue, the crier descended from above me but stopped. It turned its head and a normal human man approached it, but something was off. The dude had a nasty case of scoliosis, it looked like. He patted its head and spoke to it in an unknown language. I didn't hesitate to put a bullet between his eyes, but he didn't flinch. He instead cocked his head and spoke again in that language. He grabbed me by the neck, nearly crushing my windpipe, and he threw me to the wall. As hands clasped out from inside of it, holding me down, I could feel them biting me. Yes, the hands were biting me, and he, wearing a smile, approached me. Why must the chosen always fight back? He said something, again in the language, and they let me go. Before I could do anything else, I passed out. I'm in an unknown part of the facility. There's a rash spreading, and I know that I'm dying. I'm posting this just to say goodbye, and to say screw humanity. And also tell the devil if you see him. He owes me $12. He'll know. I have a gun to my temple. My final lesson is that, to kill man, it's simple. Just stop them from being human. This is Ulysses, for the last time, signing off.
The Department for Strange Affairs was located under central London. A line in the underground ran right next to it, and every few minutes the entire office shook as another train rattled by. This cavernous space had been created in World War II to offer protection to government officials from falling bombs while they worked. Its existence has been kept secret at the time for security reasons. 80 years later, it was still veiled in secrecy, and it housed people who worked for the government. People like me. And I worked the night shift. Arriving at the department, I reported in to my supervisor as usual. He was a former soldier with a wooden prosthetic leg that he refused to have updated. He was always immaculately dressed in a striped three-piece suit. I wore plainer clothes, ones in which I would blend in. It was hot that July. A heat wave was beginning, and it was forecast to last for weeks. I wore light brown cotton trousers and a polo shirt with a designer label, sneakers, and no socks. I had started to go bald prematurely, so I had made the decision recently to shave my head. As the heat dug in its heels, this felt like a good decision. My supervisor had nothing pressing to tell me, so I logged on my laptop. The hum of fans, trying to keep the vast array of equipment packed into the office cool, filled the air. Seated at a line of desks in front of me, the monitoring team were a picture of concentration, despite the uncomfortable conditions. They had access to CCTV cameras throughout the city, and it could listen to transmissions by the emergency services. They could also tap into private conversations if required, and had access to a database holding millions of personal and business details. As for data protection laws, well, they were swept under the carpet on a regular basis. I just started to check my emails when an alert had popped up on my screen. The monitoring team had picked up a call from a member of the public reporting and grave robbers. I clicked on the sound file. The recording was good quality. I could hear the male caller's agitated breathing as he spoke into his phone. There's a ragged hole in the ground. I can see right into the coffin. The lid's been smashed through and it's empty, and the body's gone. It's the most horrible thing. The people who did this should be locked up and the key thrown away. I didn't need to listen to any more of the recording, and I glanced over at my supervisor. I could tell from his expression that we were both thinking the same thing. Grave robbers. If only it was that simple. I'll take the van, I told him, and headed for the lift that would take me back to the surface. Driving anywhere in London was a stop-start frustration fest. How movie makers expected anybody to believe that there could be a high-speed car chase throughout the streets of the capital, it always amazed me. I had driven one of the department's top-of-the-range hybrid vans out of a parking lot, and set a route on the satellite navigation based on information provided by the monitoring team, which would take me to the graveyard. Purely based on distance, this showed a journey which should have taken 20 minutes, but I was already stuck in traffic. and someone in front of me was trying to do a three-point turn to break free of the gridlock ahead. They were making things worse by blocking traffic, trying to move in the opposite direction. I sighed and took the opportunity to catch up on the flow of information coming my way from the monitoring team via a console on the dashboard. The open grave had been occupied by Mr. Joseph Wilson. He had been 58 years old when he had died of a heart attack. He left a widow and 2 children and a will that was being disputed. He had been buried 1 week before. The traffic ahead of me moved and I made it a whole 6 feet forwards before the cars in front of me grounded to a halt again. And then I received a new message. Subject seen boarding a bus. Reacting to this, I reset the satellite navigation, replacing the address of the graveyard with a home address also pulled from the database. My new ETA was 35 minutes, if I had been the proverbial flying crow. As it was, it took me over an hour to reach my destination. I turned into a residential street. The houses looked to be nothing special, but their location would have made them very expensive. It was quiet apart from a dog barking from behind one of these sets of drawn curtains. The residents would have their feet up, binge-watching some series about dragons or superheroes. I managed to find a space to park up in and then sat and waited. While I did, I watched a recording of the onboard footage from the CCTV cameras on the night bus. The quality of the footage wasn't great, but I could make out the subject's blank expression. It had been crowded on the bus and other passengers had inched away from the subject. This being London, none of them had said or done anything else. They had blanked out the strangeness in their midst. The footage finished and I returned my full attention to the street in front of me. There was a stop 2 streets away and the bus was due. A few minutes later, my patience was rewarded. The subject appeared at the end of the street. He was moving in the shuffling, shambolic way that they all do. The dead when they rise from the grave. After climbing out of the ground, it was very common for zombies to try and go home. Whether it was a conscious decision to return to where they lived, or some kind of primitive instinct, no one knew. Whatever was driving him, Mr. Joseph Wilson, deceased, was staggering towards what used to be his front door, and I was there to intervene. I climbed out of the van and walked slowly towards him. In most of these situations that I encountered in my work, it was important to keep things calm as long as possible. Not just for health and safety reasons, but also to avoid alerting members of the public that there was anything wrong. I stepped into his path and said, "You are dead, Mr. Wilson. You need to go back to your grave." His eyes were glazed over and the first signs of decay were showing on his mottled skin. At my words, his mouth opened and a quiet groan emerged. "I'm not going to have any arguments about this, Mr. Wilson," I continued. His groan grew in volume, and he reached out towards me with his hands in a threatening way. I could see the marks in his hands and the soil under his nails from when he had broken through the coffin lid and dug his way out. I decided there was no point continuing trying to reason with me, and moved back over to the van, where I unlocked and swung open the back doors. Before setting off, I had put a cool box in the back of the van. I now popped the lid of the cool box. The brain inside it had been supplied by a local hospital with the department at a private agreement. It was still fresh and very appealing to Mr. Wilson. Its odor drifted out to him, and he sniffed at the air before turning to face the van. "Brain must eat brain," he growled and staggered towards the open doors. I had placed the cool box just out of reach and Mr. Wilson had to climb into the van to reach the irresistibly tasty to him contents. As soon as he was all the way in, I slammed the doors shut and I locked them. I noticed a couple of the curtains twitching as I made my way around to the driver's door, but I wasn't concerned. A van driver slamming his doors shut was not going to lead to anything more than annoyed mutterings from the residents. They would think that I was delivering groceries. Back behind the wheel, I glanced over my shoulder. There was a steel mesh between me and the back of the van, where Mr. Wilson was knelt over noisily devouring the brain. Once he was finished, he could get as angry as he wanted. The mesh would keep me safe. I reported the state of play to the department and received a confirmation that I was to proceed with my package back to the graveyard. The roads were quieter at this later hour, and I arrived without too many more frustrating delays. I drove along the narrow, winding road in the cemetery, which led past rows of old graves that were darkened and stooping with age, before reaching an open area where the new burials took place. A tent had been erected over one plot. As I turned the engine off, two of my colleagues from the department emerged. "All ready?" I asked. "Yeah, we're good to go," one of them replied. And together we went to fetch Mr. Wilson from the van. With the brain eaten, he was in a complete rage and was thrashing around, slamming himself into the side of the van, and the moment that we had opened the doors and he saw us, he launched himself at us. Handling a zombie is not a skill that is taught in school, but one that we had all picked up on the job, and steering well clear of his teeth, we restrained him and carried him into the tent. A halogen light illuminated the steel cage that had been constructed by my colleagues over the broken coffin. A hatch in the front of the cage hung open and we tipped Mr. Wilson in. He fell back into the coffin, and before he could twist around, the hatch was closed and secured by a padlock. And then my colleagues began to fill the grave back in with dirt. I left them to it and walked away to the sound of muffled groans. Mr. Wilson would not be leaving his grave again, and would soon fall silent as decay and insects had their way. This case could be marked complete. The rest of the night passed without any further incidents being reported, and just after 8 a.m., I turned off my laptop and I left the office. I had recently moved into an apartment complex in a converted dockside warehouse. It was stylish and close enough to work for me to walk home. An early mist was being burnt off by the sun of what was forecasted to be another very hot day, as I strolled along the banks of the river. I had a smile on my face. I enjoyed my work and I enjoyed my life. My apartment was on the 10th floor, a spacious corner property with a mezzanine level which I used as my bedroom area. The owners of the apartment directly above me were remodeling their property, and I often arrived home to the sound of hammering and drilling coming from above my ceiling. The noise was not a problem thanks to my unique sleeping arrangements. I had got the idea from an individual that I had encountered on a previous case at the Department for Strange Affairs. The coffin was custom made, constructed from oak. It had a silk interior lining, a luxurious mattress, and cotton pillows. Once closed, it was completely soundproof. There was also a surround sound speaker system installed, should I wish to listen to calming ambient music. The temperature and the airflow inside the coffin changed in response to the external conditions. It was the perfect, relaxing environment as far as I was concerned. I lowered myself in and I was asleep in seconds. The following night, the office was its usual hive of activity. I reported to my supervisor and asked if there was any ongoing cases. "It's quiet out there at the moment," he replied. "While it is, there is something I would like you to look into. There's a large antiquarian bookshop from which the department, using a cover identity, has bought a number of volumes on fantastical creatures. The books have been digitized and have made valuable additions to the database. I have heard through private channels that when the owner opens up the shop in the morning, he is finding the remains of books that had been on the shelves. The books have been burned. It could be a malicious person that is doing this, in which case we can't help. But there are no signs of anyone breaking in. So I would like you to go there tonight while the shop is closed and check things out." I headed back up to the surface. The tube was the quickest way to get to the bookshop, and there was a station across the road from the anonymous-looking office block, which hid the entrance to the department and housed its fleet of vehicles. 3 changes of underground lines later, I emerged onto a street from which the last of the late-night shoppers were drifting away. There were people milling around in the street in front of a pub, holding glasses and chatting and trying to stay cool in the still oppressive heat. None of them gave me a second look as I walked up to the bookshop. It was dark inside and a closed sign hung on the door. Using skeleton keys, I let myself in. Rows of books rose all around me. There were more stacked on the floor, apart from a small till and a ladder for reaching the upper levels. As far as I could see, every inch of the shop was taken up with books. As I moved along the rows and checked out the spines, I saw that they all appeared to be factual. There was no place for flights of fictional fantasy in this collection. There were volumes on ancient history, geography, volcanology, economics, and a myriad of other topics. Most were hardbacks and looked as though they had been well read. Moving deeper into the shop, the shelves stretched on into the distance, and there were little alcoves and dark corners where more books were crammed into. The titles became more eclectic. There were works on numerology and dowsing, and one especially fat volume entitled Mythical Beasts of the English Channel. That one caught my eye. As yet, I had seen no signs of burnt books and was wondering if my time would be better spent elsewhere, when a book on a shelf in front of me had moved. Its top corner slid out a little and then the rest of the book, until it was hanging apparently in thin air. My experience of the strange had kicked in. Moving nice and slow, I reached into a pocket, took out a pair of department-issued glasses, and I put them on. I had 20/20 vision, so I could see the natural world perfectly well. The glasses meant that I could see beyond the ordinary. Standing in front of me, holding the book that had just been removed from the shelf, was a ghost. It was a hazy form, mist-like, and as it moved, trails of gray-white spectral matter were left momentarily in its wake. I stood very still, wanting only to observe at this point, and as I had been anticipating, the ethereal hand which was holding the book began to glow red. A dull pink wash at first, that grew brighter and sharper until the hand was an angry red, and then the book it held burst into flames. The fire crackled and spat, and in less than a minute the book was consumed, and the ghost let go of it. The bemused owner would find its ashes on the floor in the morning. The ghost had been too focused on its act of destruction to notice me, and it was now moving along the shelves, perhaps looking for its next papery victim. I backtracked to the front of the shop, took out my mobile, and I called it in. 5 minutes later, I received a message telling me that support was on the way. I wiped the sweat from my face and I waited. The cavalry arrived in the shape of one of my colleagues who had been at the graveyard the night before. He was carrying what looked like a laptop bag as I let him in. "What technological ghost-catching marvel have you brought with you?" I whispered. He patted the bag and said with a grin, "You'll see. Now, do you want to show me where the unwelcome ghost is?" Together, we headed back into the depths of the shop. Just ahead of us, there was a new flare-up as flames destroyed another book. I put my glasses back on. The red was fading from the ghost's hand, back into the gray-white of the rest of its form. And dispelling ghosts was not a precise science. I had seen it done in various ways, with varying degrees of success. And as my colleague unzipped the bag, I was intrigued. How was he going to deal with this apparition? He did not take a piece of fancy-looking tech out of the bag, as I had been expecting. Instead, he produced a book, an ancient one from its appearance. It had a thick leather cover with an ornate silver clasp on the front holding it shut. "We acquired this from another bookshop, one on the outskirts of London," my colleague said. "It was not so that we could digitize the contents to add to our store of knowledge, but for situations such as this." And then he undid the clasp and opened the book. The pages inside were blank. They began to flutter and my colleague grinned again. I turned back to face the ghost. Small patches of darkness like rain brooding inside a cloud had appeared in it, and they were growing. "The darkness is fear," my colleague said, and I saw that he had donned a pair of glasses of his own and was studying the ghost. Meanwhile, the pages in the book were turning over faster and faster, being moved by some force that I could not see. And then, to my amazement, the ghost started to move towards the open book. I realized that it was being drawn in, and there was not a thing it could do about this. I glimpsed a mouth opening in the specter's twisted face, saw a scream forming, and then it was gone, into the pages, and my colleague was closing the cover, snapping the clasp back into place. He took off his glasses and said, "Excellent." We high-fived and he put the book back in its bag. "What will you do with it?" I asked. "File it," he replied. We left the bookshop together. A few late-night drinkers were still gathered outside the pub. A tired-looking barman was asking them to drink up and leave. None of them had a clue what had just happened across the road from them. The bookshop owner would also never know what we had done. The burned books that he would find in the morning would be the last, and he could carry on his business as before. "Why do you think it did it?" I asked my colleague. "The ghost, what did it have against the books?" He shrugged and said, "It's rare to be able to get into the mind of a ghost. Maybe it was a kind of censorship, and it was only targeting certain types of books. Maybe it had been murdered by a librarian. We'll never know." It was one more mystery to add to the list, and one more case that had been successfully closed. There were still trains running on the underground, and I was planning on returning with my colleague to the department when my phone began to ring. It was the monitoring team. "There's something in the river." The calm, professional voice telling me this did not add something that really should not be there, but I knew this would be the case. I ended the call and did not have long to wait before a van pulled up. I was handed the keys and told the van was loaded with diving equipment and weaponry. I set off into the night. The person who had driven the van out to me had preset the satellite navigation to take me to a bend in the river that cut through a district popular with financial traders. I climbed out of the van and stretched my arms. Office blocks stood all around me, each as featureless as the next. The lights were still on inside them, even though from where I stood, they looked empty for the night. There were no residential apartments, and a lone coffee shop was closed. It would be tomorrow morning before I could buy a pretentious, overpriced latte, all of which suited me. The less people who saw me working, the better. I was standing in one of the deserted squares around which the office blocks were placed. There were concrete slabs to sit on, concrete garden features filled with brown water-deprived grass, and concrete artworks. I walked over to the concrete barrier which overlooked the river. On my drive there, I had listened to a recording of the call which had brought me here. It had been made by the pilot of a police helicopter who had passed over this area on their way elsewhere. "We have sighting of an object in the river. It's too big to be a person, and it's not a boat," the pilot had said. "It's some kind of creature." There was a degree of hesitancy in their voice. From my experience in this field, I know a part of them would have wanted to say nothing, rather than admit to have spotted something strange. Thankfully, they had called it in, and then probably sped up so they could get away. The monitoring team who had picked up the call and forwarded it on to me had also listened to a police dispatcher informing the pilot that no units were available to go investigate, and that was A-OK, because the Department for Strange Affairs was on it. The barrier only came up to my chest, and I draped my arms over it as I stared into the water. There was very little natural tide here, and the river was dark and still. There were no signs of any strange creature, yet. To follow the course of the river by road or foot was inefficient. Instead, I returned to the van, got changed into a wetsuit, and chose a slimline high-tech harpoon from the weapon rack. Then, with the harpoon secure in the waterproof backpack, I vaulted the barrier and landed with a quiet splash in the river. I had no firm evidence where any creature might be headed, and no more reports had been picked up by the monitoring team. So I mentally tossed a coin in, made my choice, and I set off swimming downriver. This soon took me past the financial district into an area that had not yet been reached by the developers. It wouldn't be long before the scaffolding and the cranes went up, and artists' impressions of luxury apartments and desirable office space began to be advertised. For now, I was alone, with derelict buildings on either side of me. The heat had not bled into the river, and I was grateful for the protection of my wetsuit from the cold, clammy water. I swam on. Turning the next bend, I saw an abandoned barge tethered to a wooden jetty and noticed that there was a lot of silt in the water. The silt meant that there had been a disturbance here, recently, by something substantial. Moving nice and slow, I took the harpoon out of the backpack. Every nerve in my body was tingling. The creature that I was looking for was close, and I was sure of it. I peered down into the water, tried to see through the murk, and there it was, under the barge. I could make out a vast eye in the midst of a dark shape. I aimed the harpoon. As I did, a tentacle flashed out. I tried to move away, but I was too slow. The tentacle wrapped around my ankle. I kicked out at it, but all that happened was that the tentacle had tightened, and now more tentacles were unfurling and heading my way. All the while, the eye watched. There was an intelligence there. It had hidden beneath the barge, biding its time, and I had fallen into its trap. I swore into frustration. A second tentacle had by now encircled my waist. A third found my other leg. And together the tentacles were starting to drag me down into the water, closer to the creature's body. I knew that struggling was pointless. There was only one way that I could survive this. I let myself go limp, as the tentacles continued to envelop me in their slimy grip. I took a deep breath, possibly the last that I would ever take, and I was pulled under the surface. Below the eye, a mouth opened, a void ringed by teeth that looked razor sharp. In seconds, I would be forced inside it. The teeth would clamp down and the river would run red with blood. I counted 1 second, 2. I needed to leave it as late as I could. I could not afford to miss. The eye was 6 feet away from me, observing me, savoring the sight of its feast. I pulled the release. The harpoon shot forward and pierced the center of the eye. The creature's mouth opened wider. A bubbling scream appeared and its body tensed. Its tentacles flailed and released me. I propelled myself further away from it with as much force as I could and frantically swam for the jetty and pulled myself up onto it. In the water, the creature thrashed about frantically, sending water flying out. I scrambled away and I called it in. The monitoring team asked me what designation the creature was. A species unknown, I gasped, and then rolled over on my back and lay looking up at the stars until my colleagues arrived to remove the creature from the river. It would be studied and then filed in one of the department's secure warehouses that were scattered around the city. After handing over the case and returning to the office to write up my report, my supervisor gave me permission to finish early. Dawn was breaking as I limped home. I slept for 12 hours straight. Thankfully, I then had a scheduled night off to look forward to. I was still aching for my encounter with the river creature, so it was some much-needed R&R. I was a loner and dedicated to my work, but enjoyed exploring my home city whenever I could. London's vast, fragmented space still had surprises for me. I left my apartment as a stunning red sky marked the ending of another sweltering day. I walked for hours along streets steeped in history. This city had survived fire and plague and corrupt rulers. It had welcomed immigrants from across the world. If you had money, there was entertainment to be had at any time of night or day. If you were poor, the city was indifferent to your pain. And that way London was no different to any other metropolis. I paused on the steps of a cathedral. I wasn't religious in any way, but I love the architecture of these soaring buildings. High above me, gargoyles peered out into the sky. I followed their gaze, and despite the heat of the night, a cold chill ran through my body. The moon dominated the night sky. It was not a full moon. Tomorrow night it would be, which meant the Department for Strange Affairs would be on high alert. I turned round and headed home. After another good day's sleep, I arrived at my desk early. The monitoring team were huddled over their consoles, and my supervisor was on the phone. He waved me over and paused his conversation to say, "A call has been picked up from a 5-star hotel. It sounds like they could need our brand of expertise. Be a good chap and check it out." I got the location of the hotel from the monitoring team, loaded up a backpack with equipment that I might need, and set off on foot. As I weaved my way through the crowds, I listened to the recording of the call which had made this my business. The caller sounded extremely posh and extremely rattled. "They're in the Opal Suite, our most exclusive room. They're miniature monsters, hideous. I feel sick just talking about them. If this gets out, we're ruined. Ruined." I ended the recording and checked the background details that I had also been sent. The call had been made by the manager of one of London's leading hotels to its billionaire owner. The cheapest room was £1,000 a night. The Opal Suite would set you back a cool $24K. It took up most of the top floor of the hotel and was actually a dozen rooms, with a reception, a master bedroom, steam room, and communications hub amongst the facilities. It sounded like a different world, and as I stepped through the entrance doors of the hotel, I was wowed by the marble and the mahogany which filled the reception area. Everything had been polished within an inch of its life. If I had had sunglasses with me, I would have put them on to stop myself from being dazzled. Hoping there was not a service charge for walking on the floor, I went over to the reception desk and asked for the manager. He was expecting me and thought that I had been sent by the owner of the hotel. I didn't tell him who I really was or how I knew about his crisis, but I assured him that yes, I knew what I was doing and that I would be discreet. He gave me a passkey and told me to hurry up. I took a lift that played classical music and smelled delightful. The entrance to the Opal Suite was a dark wooden door with an actual opal set into it. The swirl of reds and greens and the precious stone were hypnotizing. I slid the passkey through the gold-lined slot at the side of the door and it clicked open. I stepped over the threshold. While I was in the lift, as a precaution, I had got changed into a hazmat suit. It was vacuum packed into a size that fitted easily into my backpack, and wearing it gave me robust protection from hazardous materials and gases and numerous other things, including, I hoped, miniature monsters. I still didn't know exactly what I was doing with, but I was confident that they would not be able to make it into my sealed suit. The room that I had entered was in darkness. I couldn't see anything as simple as a light switch, so I tried saying "on," and that did the trick. Discreetly tucked away, light fittings glowed into life, and I could see that I was in a lobby with 3 doors leading off it. I looked through one, into a lounge with the largest sofa that I had ever seen in my life. More doors opened out from this into the other rooms. I checked the other 2 doors, accessed directly from the lobby. One was a water closet with wall tiles inlaid with more opals and gold taps over a black quartz sink. The other was a bedroom. I could make out the shape of a 4-poster bed and felt my feet sink into a thick, luxurious carpet as I moved into the room, even through the all-in-one protective layer of my hazmat suit's boots. I could feel how soft it was. This was a carpet designed to pamper the feet of the bridge. I said, "On," and the lights glowed and revealed the critters that I had come looking for. The carpet was crawling with them. Fleas, which seemed to have sensed my presence, because all of a sudden they were not just crawling anymore. They were hopping 1 to 2 feet into the air. This gymnastic feat would have been impressive if it hadn't have been so creepy. Under the hazmat suit, my skin began to itch. The irritation that I was feeling was all in my mind, I knew. Though some of the jumping fleas were now bouncing off me, they had no way through the suit. Surely. I must admit I was beginning to worry that I wasn't going to be safe from them for long. More and more of the fleas were jumping up, and the ones that were not, they were crowding around my feet and starting to rush up my legs. I was no expert in flea behavior, but this seemed extreme. This seemed strange. I decided to make a hasty retreat from the bedroom. By doing this, I took a whole host of fleas with me, but they would have spread from the bedroom anyway sooner or later. This was a problem that was only going to multiply unless I dealt with it. The hazmat suit had a built-in phone, thankfully, as there was no way that I wanted to take it off to use my phone. I called the monitoring team and I asked for assistance. When my colleague arrived, equipped with a passkey of their own, they found me standing in one of the showers in the Opal suite. The shower was turned on full. I was still dressed from head to toe in the hazmat suit, and despite the force of the water, some of the fleas continued to cling onto it. My colleague wore a hazmat suit as well and carried a bag holding a small laboratory's worth of equipment. I had requested that the fleas be tested. Something was making them hyper-aggressive and I needed to know what it was. After testing half a dozen fleas, holding them down with sturdy tweezers and taking samples and analyzing these, my colleague looked at me with an expression of shock on his face. My voice muffled by my suit, I asked, "What is it?" He swallowed and replied, "The fleas are infected." My mind began to race. What kind of infection would cause them to behave in this way? Fleas had been behind the Black Death that had ravaged through Europe centuries ago. Was this the beginning of a new and terrible plague? Fear building inside me, I asked in a hesitant voice, "What are they infected with?" His answer shocked me to the core. Lycanthropy. The fleas have ingested the blood of a werewolf and now it is the full moon. The infected blood is sending them crazy. If they could get at our flesh, they would try to tear us to pieces. I leaned forwards and put my hands on my knees and tried to steady my breathing. "Okay," I said, hoping that I sounded calmer than I felt. "In that case, we need to isolate this hotel and everyone and everything in it until dawn and the end of the full moon. After that, the regular exterminators can blitz the place." He did not ask me how to seal off the hotel. The people who worked for the department were the best at finding solutions to the craziest of problems, and I was happy to leave it to my colleague. I had another priority. I needed to find the source of the infection. I was looking for a werewolf. I discarded the hazmat suit and then cornered the hotel manager in his office. I told him, "I need a list of all the staff that had serviced the Opal suite and the guests who have stayed there in the last month." He didn't look happy about this, but he complied. I sent the list of staff and guests onto the monitoring team and asked them to do a detailed check of all the individuals on it. I had a theory. Firstly, I assumed that the fleas had been long-term residents in the Opal suite. Hotel rooms, even the poshest, were rife with all sorts of bugs. The second part of my theory was that someone infected with lycanthropy had spent time in the Opal suite recently, when the moon was not full. A cleaner or one of the well-to-do guests. The fleas had bitten them and ingested their blood. I shuddered as I thought once more of what this had done to the fleas. I had left the hotel before it was quarantined and I stood in the street. There was no breeze and the hot night air had added to my discomfort. Thankfully, the super efficient monitoring team soon sent me what I needed. The names of one of the individuals on the list had raised a red flag. Benedict Watts was the eldest son of a family that had earned a fortune from selling pharmaceuticals. He was wealthy beyond most people's wildest dreams. Surveillance material held by the department indicated that he might also be a werewolf. The torn-apart carcasses had been found after full moons close to locations that he was known to frequent. There was also CCTV footage showing a wolf-like creature in the vicinities. This had not been enough for the department to act, but that was about to change. because Benedict had stayed at the Opal Suite 2 weeks before. The latest intel obtained by the monitoring team showed me that he was currently in residence at a multi-million-pound townhouse owned by his family. It was tucked away on one of London's most exclusive streets. An hour later, I was breaking in. I dropped down from the window that I had cut out and landed with cat-like agility on my feet in a long corridor. It was in darkness apart from a sliver of light coming from the door to my left that was slightly ajar. I crept towards it, inched it slowly open enough for me to squeeze through, and then froze. There was someone sitting in a high-backed chair in the center of the room. He wore an expensively tailored suit, and his short dark hair was slicked back into a center part. And he was looking at me and smiling. "Well, what do we have here?" he asked in an arrogant tone. "Are you a burglar, a common thief?" I composed myself and stood up straight. "I work for the government and I'm looking for Benedict Watts." He gave me a sarcastic round of applause as he said, "Well, congratulations, you found him. I am who you seek." So much for my number one suspect, I thought. He was a man, not a monster. But still, I hoped that he could help in my hunt. In a calm, professional manner, I asked, "And is it correct that you recently stayed in the Opal Suite?" His smile became a sneer. "I did," he replied. "I stayed there with my friends. Would you like to meet them?" In the wake of his words, a creature entered the room. It moved on all fours, and it was sleek and terrifying, a figure from the nightmare realm. This was the beast that I sought. This was the werewolf. Only it was not alone. 3 more of the abhorrent beasts followed in its trail, and then all 4 of the werewolves began to circle me. Their dark, chilling eyes fixed on me. Their claws extended and their fangs were revealed as they snarled. I always went equipped with silver bullets and a weapon on the night of a full moon. They were still in my backpack. I reached around for them. The odds were stacked impossibly against me, but even so, I had to try. I would not go down without a fight. And Benedict remained seated. It seemed that he was in league with the werewolves, the elegant human leader of their pack. "You might wing one of them," he said, "but the others will make short work of you. You'll make a nice starter course before I send them out onto the streets to feed." "I'm going to end you," I hissed. He laughed. "You," he said with scorn. "I don't think so." The words were barely out of his mouth when the sound of shattering glass filled the air. I span round and grinned. 2 of my colleagues from the department had run into the room. There would be no stealth. They would smash their way in, and fragments of broken glass were still falling off them as they drew and aimed. A pair of the werewolves howled and fell. The other 2 were down just seconds later. And that left just Benedict. He didn't hang about and he sprinted for the door. But unfortunately for him, another of my colleagues was waiting outside and took him into custody. And that should have been it. Another case closed, leaving me free to hunt new monsters and keep London safe. But things did not work out that way. I thought the downed werewolves were history. They lay slumped on the floor and were changing slowly back into the human form. I had let my guard down. I could not react quickly enough when one of them leapt up to me and bit me. This was the last thing that it ever did, but that was no consolation for me. I was infected. The test that I took after I was bitten confirmed this. It was my supervisor who told me that we could not take any risks, and then he put me on an indefinite leave from my job with the Department for Strange Affairs. So that's me now. I feel lost without my work and I'm scared of what the future might bring, but I haven't given up. Strange things happen and perhaps science will find a cure for my condition, but until then I can only hope. There's a full moon tonight. I have bolted the windows and drawn the curtains so I can't see it, but I can feel it. It's calling the creature inside me. I open the lid of my sleeping place. I've had it adapted. The silk lining has been replaced with steel, and once I click the lid closed, an automatic lock will be activated. It's on a timer and will not be possible for the lid to be opened until after the full moon. I climb into the darkness, seal myself in, and wait for the change to begin.
The 7th of September, 1997. I don't have much longer to live, and nothing left to yearn for. Doc said I'd be lucky to survive another 2 months or so. Lung cancer. Never smoked a damn cigarette in my life, but here we are. The irony. By the time that you will read this, my ass will be 5 feet underground. Alexander, if you're reading this, I want you to promise me, keep fighting. Only people like us stand between millions of innocents and the spawn of hell itself. I've spent 57 years being that wall, and made you do the same. Even if you resent me for it, please, continue to be that wall. I am well aware of the dangers you will face in the path that